So what am I looking at here?
What you're looking at, Julian, is a replica of the Emerald Tablet. You're looking at the Emerald Tablet. Well, not exactly the Emerald Tablet, because there is no Emerald Tablet. We don't even know if a physical Emerald Tablet ever existed in the first place. So what is this? This is...
Hey guys, if you're not subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and hit that like button on the video. And if you don't have time to watch this episode right now, no problem, but I'd really appreciate it if you would save it to your watch later playlist. Finally, if you'd like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below. Thank you.
All right, so you and I were just talking about the back of the Sphinx. And what you said is like a secret entrance or something like that?
So in the back of the Sphinx, the rump, near the hunches. In fact, we could probably pull this up if you look for just back of the Sphinx or entrance back of the Sphinx. What had happened is when Egyptologist Mark Lehner was doing his study on the Sphinx, analyzing all of the stones, there was someone from the village, one of the local Egyptians, who came up to him and said, right here, he pointed to the stone. He's like, if you remove this stone, there's a passage into the Sphinx. Okay. And so that's exactly what they did. And sure enough, there was a passage into the Sphinx. And so we can see it from probably the first image in the second row to the left.
Oh, far left, second row.
Yeah.
Down one.
Right there. Click on that. Yep. And yes, now I'm going to need you to zoom into the photo. You're going to look at the back. See that little hole in the back of the Sphinx all the way to the right there?
Agree.
It's an opening.
Right
where it's covered up, where it says Sphinx of Egypt.
All right, go back to the image and let's see if we could just zoom in off Google. Yeah. I see.
There you go. Yeah. That's it right there.
Oh, the one where there's like the white thing outside of it?
That's it.
Now, how big is that crevice approximately?
I forget the dimensions off the top of my head.
But like, could you and I climb into that?
Well, I already have.
Okay.
Probably shouldn't be saying this.
Don't worry about
it. This is forbidden.
It's too late.
But I've been in the Sphinx. All right. So there's an image of me sticking my head out of that, and few have been in there. So basically, what you have, if you were to go in there, and I could tell you, again, the Egyptologist Zahi Hawass, there's nothing more to see here. There's nothing, There is an entrance into the Sphinx. It's this entrance here in the back. And what happens is if you were to go down, it goes into a bifurcated shaft. It splits, okay? And it wraps around to the left side. It goes, this is a rough estimation, maybe 15 feet, 20 feet, 15 feet. It's a small area. And then it goes up and in and curves around to the back of the Sphinx where they have the Great Fissure. Remember I said there's a fissure, a defect in the geology that runs through the rump? There's another entrance up there. If you were to pull up an aerial view of the Sphinx, we can look at that entrance as well. And they kind of connect. But now it's all boarded up. But what's in there is a very important piece of geological evidence, because there's a stone in there that was used as a repair. And the Egyptologists, even Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner, had a debate on this one. Zahi says it's Old Kingdom. Mark Lehner says, no, it's an Old Kingdom stone being used, reusurped, as a repair job. But it basically gives us, information about the geology of the Sphinx. Let me see if you can pull...
What one?
Actually, right, the one all the way to the left, we can use that. So second row, I'm sorry, go back.
That one?
Yeah, but wait till it turns on its side and then we'll pause it, or just fast forward it a bit, maybe 3/4 of the way.
Okay, almost there.
All right, pause.
Now can we full screen that, Aless? Beautiful. Excellent. Okay, what are we looking at?
Okay, so let's talk about entrances into the Sphinx. I've talked about the one in the back. Inside there is an important piece of geological evidence, because the whole point with that is, why would they be doing repairs in the Old Kingdom if the Sphinx was fashioned in the Old Kingdom? Why would brand new sculpture, why would you need to repair it? So alternative historians will say, see, this is proof that the Sphinx is much older. John Anthony West's theory is correct. But what you have to realize is the Sphinx was already eroded before the Sphinx has already been subject. Again, I had mentioned how Dr. Robert Schoch went there, and a lot of people have this consensus that all the geologists back Dr. Robert Schoch when I don't know any geologists that are fully on board with Dr. Robert Schoch. I mentioned Colin Reeder. He doesn't entirely agree with Dr. Robert Schoch, especially with the dating. He thinks the Sphinx is only could be a few hundred years older because we were talking about the inventory stela. Problem with the inventory stela is there's a concept in Egyptology known as archaizing. And what it is, the Egyptologists explain it as a way of tying yourself to an earlier lineage or basically trying to rewrite or revise history. So the inventory stela is actually a very late Egyptian, it's very late in the Egyptian civilization, around 26th dynasty, I think, if I recall. This is, Old Kingdom, then you have intermediate periods in between. You have Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, then late periods, then Greek and Roman. So there's a very late text, I think from the Sayet period, 26th dynasty, if I recall. And what they're doing, and this isn't uncommon, they're referencing, the past, and they're trying to write themselves into the story to prove that they have this lineage. So Egyptologists call this archaizing, and they don't take the historical aspect as serious because they know that this sort of rewriting of history, which is happening now with alternative history, was already happening during ancient Egyptian times. But that's one piece of evidence. One thing to keep in mind, there are multiple Khufus. There was a magician Khufu. Other people probably took on the name of Khufu, so we don't know if it's actual Khufu from the pyramid. Right. We don't know if it's their account of the story. It's not exactly a document from earliest times. So Egyptologists dismissed the inventory stela. But what Colin Reeder observed, it has more to do with the geological features and how the rain comes down. There's a causeway that leads to the second pyramid. The causeway that leads to the second pyramid may be the oldest aspect of the Giza complex, older than the pyramids.
How do we know that?
We don't with certainty.
But yeah, how do we hypothesize that?
It could have even been an old pathway or road that goes back into pre-dynastic times when you had what are known as the Buto Madi. You have these indigenous cultures. Another thing I often hear people throw around the term Cometians. This is all new. This is all invented by author Stephen Mailer, Chematology, and throw out Egyptology and come follow my cult, the Kemet school. And the ancient Egyptians, pre-dynastic Egyptians, were known as the Cometians. I've heard Bright Insight, Jimmy Cressetti, repeat this on the Joe Rogan podcast. That is a new term that's been invented. We know there were people in Egypt before the dynastic Egyptians, no Cometians. We have the Buto and the Mahdi, and then they're cultures that come together and they form the Buto Mahdi.
Why is Jimmy saying that then?
Because he doesn't know the real history and he's just repeating.
Yeah, but what is he basing it off of?
The echo chamber of chematology. So Jimmy went on a trip. I mean, I can't speak for Jimmy, but my observation is Jimmy went as a tourist to Egypt, went with the Kemet school, learned from the Kemet school. Kemet school proposed alternative ideas. It was founded on the teachings of Hakim Ayawan, who was in the film Pyramid Code. My mentor, John Anthony West, was also in the film. This is why the whole debate between me and Debunking Dan broke out on Twitter, because on Rogan recently, they're both on Rogan recently, and Jimmy states on Rogan that John Anthony West was mentored by Hakim, and he learned everything he knew about ancient Kemet from Hakim, and that's the furthest thing from the truth.
It is.
John was never a fan of Hakim or chematology or the Kemet school. In fact, these people had invited me to film a biopic covering the history, a documentary on Hakim Ayawan and the Kemet school teachings, because they knew I knew the material. Years before Jimmy was even a YouTuber, I was already going to their lectures. I went through Egypt with them. I read all the books. I knew everything there is you can possibly find that was published on Hakim and Kemet school teachings. And I told John at the time, he was still alive, I said, hey, I want to, the Kemet school is inviting me to do this documentary. I've been working with them. And he was like, pure lunacy. He's like, Mailer, Hakim, he was not a fan. And part of it is, they try to say that the Sphinx is older than what West says, because this author, Stephen Mailer, is saying Hakim said, it's hearsay. Hakim said the Sphinx could be 40 to 60,000 years old, which is different than John's theory. He has to push it back a little bit because he was writing a book and everyone needs an older date to make the book more exciting. And so they do tours, and Jimmy went on tour with them, and he's got a Kemet school education of Egypt. Between that and studying Brian Forster videos, Brian Forster tours with Kemet School, and Uncharted Air, they all go through the same company. I'm one of the only ones that I have my own company, and I operate independently of all of that in Egypt. And so Jimmy is claiming that he learns this from Kemet School, that the ancient Egyptians were Cometians. No, what we understand in academic Egyptology is there were people in Egypt before the dynastic Egyptians. You got the Nakata culture, you got the Badarians, you've got the Buto, the Mahdi, the Buto Mahdi. These are the indigenous peoples of Egypt before the dynastic civilization begins. And specifically around the Giza area, you have the Buto Mahdi, which actually have ties into the Levant, up Turkey, Jordan, that whole area, which I think is actually responsible for influencing the megalithic architecture we see in Egypt, because there was a fusion, and we know there was trade, and right from the earliest times there's a connection. Anyway, he uses the term Cometian, and that's incorrect. There were no Cometians, and I had brought that up on Twitter. I was like, well, mainly he mentioned that John Anthony West was mentored by Hakim. This isn't true. It's the furthest thing from the truth. John would be rolling in his grave if he wasn't cremated.
Well, maybe the ashes are rolling.
He was not down with the ideas proposed by Kemet School. He didn't see it as a verifiable source.
I got you.
So, when I brought this up to Jimmy on Twitter, and Debunking Dan jumped in, they both started attacking me, and then they tried to defame me and say that I'm not even connected to John Anthony West. And that he learned from Hakim. And that Jimmy Bright Insight says, well, there's proof of this in the Pyramid Code documentary. John Anthony West admits it himself. I challenge any of you viewers to go and look up the Pyramid Code. It's on YouTube for free. It might be on Netflix or Amazon. Go look up the Pyramid Code. Watch the Pyramid Code documentary. There's like maybe 3 or 4 segments with John Anthony West. And tell me if anywhere in that film John Anthony West says that he learned everything he learned about Egypt from Hakim, and that Hakim was his mentor. Because that's what Jimmy's saying. And that's not true. So I brought this up because we were talking about John's teachings in the Sphinx, the water erosion theory, and we were talking about the entrance in the back and how Mark Lehner relied on a local Egyptian. Now, this is a guy that has studied the Sphinx stone by stone, knew it inside out, published a paper, started writing about it, and then, lo and behold, there was something there that the eyes couldn't see. No single set of eyes could see it all. You have someone who grew up and lived there, who remembered from the early 20th century when the excavations were taking place and the restoration work by Emil Barres, one of the local villagers, because they would carry baskets back and forth. He remembered that there was a passage there that got blocked up. So,
You good?
He remembered that there was a passage there that got blocked up. So when the Egyptologists actually went and removed the stone, sure enough, there's the passage. And that's what I was talking about, has the geological evidence in it. But in addition to that, it wraps around and there's an opening in the back of the Sphinx. So if we look to where you see where the paws are in the lower right.
This video is sponsored by our friends at Aura. The other day I was talking with an expert who's actually going to be appearing on this podcast sometime soon about all of the corporate data breaches that are happening and how the heads of these companies, and I'm talking Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, literally aren't even taking some of this seriously. They don't understand how exposed they are. And the reality is, when these breaches happen, it's your data that is being spread out onto the web and the dark web beyond your control for spammers and the worst people on the internet to potentially get a hold of. And this is where Aura comes in. Aura keeps you safe by doing all of the work on this for you. They'll identify data brokers who are selling your information and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. So all you got to do is give Aura a few weeks and you'll stop seeing your information on these sites when you search yourself, which will lead to less spam. Furthermore, Aura constantly monitors the dark web and notifies you if your information has been exposed. Aura is going to let you know fast if anyone tries to use your personal information to try to access your credit or banking accounts. Plus, they're going to give you up to $5 million in identity theft insurance if the worst case does in fact happen. And if all that's enough, Aura also has a VPN that will give you access to over 100 virtual locations so that you can scroll the web privately. So you can go to the link in my description below, aura.com/Julian Dorey, to try 14 days for free. And that's going to be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal information is currently exposed. Once again, you can use that link in my description below, aura.com/Julian Dorey, to sign up now and get 14 days for free.
And behind, the body gets
The
really
back
thin.
paws. The back paws.
Yeah, the back paws. But if you look up at the top of the back, it gets really thin toward the back. Then it opens up again into the rump. the hunches, the
Yes.
bigger area, right where it's kind of getting really indented. That's where the fissure, it runs through the Sphinx, through the ground, right across the enclosure, through the whole plateau to the other side. It's one long line, a geological defect that runs through the ground and through the Sphinx.
Is that like the step-looking thing?
The step-looking thing, exactly. That's where the fissure is.
Gotcha.
I was saying that, yes, the stair-step looking thing, that's a general area where the fissure runs through the back of the Sphinx. And there's an entrance, a cavity. It's not man-made, but there's a I mean, it might have been, fashioned a bit by man over time, carved down a little. But there's a cavity that goes into the Sphinx, and it wraps all the way around the right side of the Sphinx and goes to that entrance in the back. In fact, there's early accounts where people thought one of the pharaohs, Amasis, was buried in there. They think it's a secret chamber. Another one is at the top of the head of the Sphinx. You see how there's like a white circle at the top of the head? This is what I was referencing earlier.
With the crown.
Yeah, there's old it's probably some sort of crown or some sort of attainment, something that would have went on the head of the Sphinx. We have a precedence for this. You can see evidence of this in the Luxor Museum, where you have a small scaled down Sphinx of Tut, and he has the crown, and it's basically like a Lego piece. It snaps into place. Right. Crown is missing. But people think that there's a way into the Sphinx is through the head, that there was an illustration that came out that shows a passage leading from the head down into these chambers inside the body of the Sphinx. This is because of the work of I'm drawing a blank. Reisner, George Reisner. He was an Egyptologist from Harvard. It did expeditions and excavations at the Sphinx. In fact, he's part of the reason for attributing the Sphinx to Khafra, because in the pyramids to Khufu, the Great Pyramid to Khufu, because he did a lot of the excavations around the pyramids, where you have the 3 satellite, or they call them Queen's pyramids, Hanut's son, and the relatives of Khufu, the wife, and so forth. And so George Reisner, there was someone that said they got an account from George Reisner, and they reported in a paper that he's saying that they found, inside the head of the Sphinx, leading down into an actual chamber, a temple inside the Sphinx. That never happened. It was proven to be a fault. So you'll see images of this on the internet. You'll see people use this image in YouTube videos, but the whole thing is it's a hoax. It's already been dismantled. If you dig into it.
A YouTube video with a hoax? That would never happen.
No, it's all true. It's on YouTube. It must be real.
Yes, it's all real.
Yeah. So we know that it goes down about 6 feet or so. How do we know? Actually, if you might be able to find it if you Google "man inside head of Sphinx" or "hole in head of Sphinx man."
Yeah, you know what?
There's an old vintage photo.
We Googled this in episode 154, I believe, or 153 with Matt LaCroix, maybe like 2 hours in, or
what was he saying?
Hour and a half in. Where we could, I'm pretty sure it was within the episode. If it was, it would have been at like the 130 timestamp, something like that. But you can see it where there's literally like his head's up.
Scroll down a little bit, you might see the old photo of the man standing inside. Oh yeah, there it is to the left on the bottom. That one. Click on that.
Yes.
This is before they filled it with cement. That's the head of the Sphinx.
Whoa.
He's probably, who knows, he's maybe 5 feet. So actually, we're probably looking at about 4 to 5 feet of depth. We can't say with certainty. But then that was filled up with cement, and they cemented early 1920s, 30s.
Why did they do that?
I might be misquoting the date. I've checked my notes. It was the Emile Barès. He was a French Egyptologist.
Yeah, why did they do that?
Did a lot of disservice to the Sphinx. They thought they were doing restorations and repairs by filling in things with concrete, but
the fuck they weren't.
Yeah, exactly. And even, people criticize Zahi Hawass, but even Zahi says that was a bad move, because it actually is destroying the Sphinx. But anyway, they filled it up. And so, people will use that. The other thing is the side profile of the Sphinx. If the image all the way to the bottom right.
Oh, yeah. See that?
On the side of the ear.
Yep.
Click on that.
That one.
Yep.
Perfect.
Just beneath the ear, there's this little square window looking thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there's an arrow right there, a big red arrow. It's probably a Bright Insight video. And if you click on it, it's probably somebody suggesting, I'd guarantee you click on it, somebody suggesting it's a hidden entrance. What's it say? Well, they're just asking the question.
Pause it. All right, yes. Oh, Stargate Voyager. All right, pause that, Aless, because it might be. All right, so what's that under the ear of the Sphinx?
Yeah, so Stargate Voyager. This is D. Olson suggesting that, what is this? What's under the Sphinx? A lot of people will try to use that to say, there's an entrance into the Sphinx.
It's where Man Bear Pig is.
Yeah, you would enter the Sphinx under its ear, a secret location, which is very unusual. It's not an entrance.
How do you know it's not an entrance?
Because it was for the royal beard. It's where the beard would have been attached.
How do we know this?
Well, because the beard broke off. And because we can see from the preponderance of evidence of other artifacts that, are fashioned in the same way. This is, you see examples of this, like the hole in the head or different things, openings where things would attach in Egypt. So we know that the Sphinx originally had what's known as a royal beard, which is something the pharaohs would wear. What you'd see the beards on a pharaoh, it wasn't an actual beard, it was regalia that they would put on. And the Sphinx is supposed to be the pharaoh merged with the lion body. It's the solar principle of man. Esoterically, it's the consciousness of man fused with the solar principle. It's man's ability to partake in the divine. It's a message for us. It's what's known as an androsphinx.
Interesting.
Anyway, yeah, that's the attachment that would attach for the beard. The beard broke off. We do have pieces of it. There's pieces of it in the Cairo Museum and the British Museum. So that's not an entrance. It was just the attachment for the beard. The hole in the head is not an entrance. It was used for a peg, which probably had a crown. The hole in the rump is a natural geological fissure. The hole in the back is later. It's probably looters. People have been trying to get it, had these ideas all along in ancient times, and you can see all the chisel marks where they burrowed their way through the limestone. And then there's another small opening right behind the neck on the back of the Sphinx. It's hard to see sometimes. We call this Perring's hole. John Shea Perring, who along with Howard Weiss were early English explorers in Egypt. Howard Weiss did a lot of excavations in Egypt back then, not, the methods that they used back then. Like, for example, they would use dynamite to blow things up. And that's what happened. And actually, Zahi Hawass later went and pulled out the tools years later. But anyway, we call that Perring's hole because there's a little hole in the back. None of these lead really anywhere. I mean, they do in the rump, it does go somewhere. It goes into the left and up and around. Then on the right side, the northern side of the Sphinx, if you were to look at a northern profile shot of the Sphinx, you'll see where it looks like there used to be an entrance. And there was. In fact, we found old photographs of two men standing inside, like the stomach of the Sphinx on the side. And Zahi says, and I have this in the video I have on the documentary video, Sphinx Origins and Hidden Entrances on my YouTube channel, the clip with Zahi where he says...
Link in description below.
Where Zahi Hawass, the Egyptologist, says that they have the images of people inside and that there was an opening and they patched it up. But before they patched it up, he took the wall down and went back inside. Problem is, we have nothing published about this in Egyptology. So we don't know how far in that entrance goes. We don't know how wide it is, how tall it is. We don't know dimensions. All we have is Zahi saying, move along, nothing to see here. And he could be right. It may not go anywhere. It may just be a natural cavity. But... we just looking at it by the surface, we don't always, we can make assumptions. We can't say with certainty. It might, with a closer eye, like in the back of the Sphinx. Yes. Mark Lehner was finished with his work, and then lo and behold, somebody comes and is like, remove this stone, and there's a passage, and a whole new world opens up for them. They actually went in and retrieved stuff, but I think Mark Lehner pulled out a pair of shoes and stuff. So
who? Oh, Lehner.
Mark Lehner. So we know people have been there in more recent times. And we know people have been in there anyway because the locals were going in and out of there. People go sleep inside the Sphinx back in the day. Locals, dragomen would take tourists around and pay to sleep in the Sphinx.
And then at some point, this kind of ivory tower narrative starts where, the people in control the access and slowly take away transparency in doing it, make stupid things happen to the Sphinx, like putting concrete in holes, and leads to everyone saying, what are they covering up? And I get why those conversations start because of that.
Well, I don't think Emile Barrace was trying to cover up the truth. I think in his mind, he thought he was restoring the Sphinx by adding concrete to hold things together.
His intention was different than what the execution looked like.
Yeah,
no?
Exactly. And then even, like the back of the Sphinx, bricking it up. I think that's just restoration. At some point, they came along and they're like, well, we know this cavity only goes so far. We don't need access. Let's cover it up and brick it up, and that's what they did. I don't think it was intentionally to hide some mysterious thing. You'll always see images of Zahi in there. I've been inside, and I was fortunate because I was part of a film, actually, where they brought me in to play the counter role against Zahi because my mentor was John Anthony West. There was a film by Ruud Gillett. I don't know if you know Ruud Gillett. He's a footballer.
I don't think so.
really soccer. We say football in America, but we say soccer in America. But in the UK, he's from the Netherlands. He's famous in the '90s. He had dreadlocks. They called him the Black Tulip, and he's everybody in Europe knows who Ruud Gullit is. And he did a big documentary on Prime a couple of years ago, Amazon Prime, exploring the ancient Egypt, and they had me in the season. The last episode finale where they're basically pitting me against Zahi Hawass, and I go over all the evidence for the cavities inside the Sphinx.
Very cool.
Yeah, so there are, as far as we know, this is it. There are no actual evidence, there's no actual entrances besides the entrances we pointed out, which most of them are natural cavities, defects, or looters trying to burrow their way in. But I've been inside the Sphinx. I've seen every nook and cranny, with the exception, I can't say I've been in the chest of the Sphinx, but I have accounts from others. Now, hey, there might be some stone in there that could get moved and there's a passage. Probably not, because the core of the Sphinx wouldn't be masonry. It would be the natural rock formation. So I'd like to think the Egyptologist and Mark Lehner surveyed this really well and were able to determine there's nothing more. Years ago, I would have been like, you need more eyes on that. We need to get in there. There could be an entrance. I'm at a point now where I don't believe that's the case. One problem, though, with the ivory towers in Egyptology, like I said on the side, Zahi's never published anything about what they found inside the Sphinx. And that would be important. Let's know about dimensions. Let's know about, all the information we can gather. And this is a big problem in Egyptology, that a lot of publications on these sites are scant. Now, while there's tombs and lexicons of plethora of stuff written on Egyptology, when it comes to actual archaeology, there's only a handful of papers that have been written about the Bent Pyramid before they reopened it, or there's absolutely nothing published about his findings. He'll just say there's nothing to see here. But okay, I want to know, what are the dimensions? What's the rock type? Could we be missing something that could lead further into the Sphinx? Maybe. Probably not, but maybe. Yeah. So.
It's crazy because we'll still be peeling this all away 50 years from now and still asking a lot of the same questions, new ones that come up, and we're talking about things that, as the years go on, it just gets thousands and thousands of years older.
I would like to think within the next 50 years, we are going to develop, we're going to broaden our understanding and develop new perspectives because of technology.
I hope
because technology is
you're right.
rapidly growing, and we're starting to see things now that we can't. Good example of this is a discovery that I just recently made in Peru. I just returned from month-to-month touring, Peru, Bolivia, Easter Island, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Egypt again, and then just came back home for a few days, and here I am. When we were in Peru, we brought with us a state-of-the-art UV camera, one of these really expensive UV cameras, and we were trying to look at the rocks, the stone type, because there's something going on in Peru that's a great mystery with the polygonal stone walls, how they were put together and how they were fashioned.
Polygonal stone walls?
Polygonal. Okay. Basically, they have multiple, there's like multi-sided stone. Pull up Polygo. Yeah. Polygonal Masonry, Peru.
Yeah, Polygonal Masonry, Peru. Polyg. Wait, no, I can't do it.
Polygo. Right, any of these.
Close enough. Yeah.
This is Polygonal Masonry. Right, perfect. Okay. I think this is Saxe-Woman. Is it? Where is this? Curious Castle. I can't see.
Horatio's philosophy.
There's a bunch. All the masonry looks like this. Yeah, so it could be something else. But you see, it's just not square blocks. It's different shapes. And some of them are very unusual. And so, in fact, a lot of them, we couldn't understand it at first because I brought some guys with me that are, architects and engineers, and we're looking at this and we're like, some of this stuff isn't necessarily intended to be earthquake proof. Some of it we can say, but other examples where little pieces of stone interlock together, it makes absolutely no sense until you step back and apply an esoteric lens and start to look in the symbolism of the stone. The stone has a language itself. A lot of it is shapes. I started to realize that there was a flower pattern in many of the walls where you have a center and you have individual stones making up the petals. And then I came to find out they actually know about this already. And the locals were pointing out, there's actually even a poster there in Cusco where they have the serpent and different animals. So the stones they're put together in a way to symbolize different fauna and flora and animals and vegetation. Okay, but the shapes themselves are very unusual. And when you look at it, how a lot of it is andesite rock. And you're like, how did they actually get these cuts? And how did they not only get the cuts, what's mind-boggling is how they put the stone together in the first place to lock everything together. Yes. And so there are accounts, early accounts of the Spanish, the early explorers in the South America that are referencing.
Like Cortez and all them?
Cortez, after the not Cortez specifically, but yes, exactly. When people are coming into Meso-America, I forget the actual explorer. I'd have to look it up in my notes, but basically, there's an account where they're saying the indigenous people, the people of the Andes that were there, had some sort of way of shaping the stone. Right, whether it was through some sort of chemical composition or some natural ingredient this is still a big mystery for people. The alternative space is a lot of different theories, but how they actually shaped the andesites. First, you got to move these things from the quarry, which is an amazing feat. To me, Sacsayhuaman is more mind-blowing than anything in Egypt. I love Egypt. There's amazing mysteries in Egypt. You got giant megalithic stones. But when I finally got to Sacsayhuaman and I came face-to-face with the stones, I was blown away. First, how they had to move them there. Then how they had to get them into place. And then the shapes themselves. So there's a whole, mystery.
How did they move them there?
That's a good question. I don't know with certainty, but what I do know is in other civilizations, like with Egypt, a lot of times they would use rollers, wooden rollers, and we have evidence in Egypt. This has been a mystery for a while, or allegedly, alternative circles will say, how did they move the stones? It's not so much how they move the stones horizontally. That isn't a mystery. There's plenty of sufficient theories that show how they did it. In addition to that, there's textual evidence. If you go to El Bahari, the temple of Hatshepsut in Luxor, in the lower tier of her temple, right in the front in a relief, we have a full description with hieroglyphs of how her genius architect and lover, Senamut, moved the obelisk from the Aswan quarry, some 300, I don't know the exact, it's like 400 or 500 miles from Giza to the Aswan quarry. Luxor is in the middle, so maybe some 300 miles. How they moved it, and they did it, they used the Nile River, and they brought the stones down. So actually extracting it out of we don't know with certainty, but there's a lot of theories that are reasonable to conjecture. And then we know the different techniques they use to move it. We can see them actually moving it on the walls, right? And this is, a lot of people use lost civilizations and what's known as inheritance theory. The idea that lost technology theory, the idea that the tools are so advanced, the tool marks are so advanced in Egypt, the Egyptians didn't have this in the Egyptological record. How could they have done this? Therefore, it couldn't be the Egyptians. It must be a product of a lost civilization. And then the Egyptians just came along and inherited all this stuff. The Egyptians just threw their crude graffiti on these monuments. And that is not a narrative that I can subscribe to.
I have to tell you about this game-changing product I use before a night out with drinks. It's called ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol. Pre-Alcohol is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. It's this byproduct, not your dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Last month, I headed down to Philadelphia on Valentine's Day, to be precise, to celebrate my Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. You heard me talk about this the last time we talked about ZBiotics. But yeah, before we went out onto Broad Street that day, it was obviously an amazing day in Philadelphia. I handed everyone a ZBiotics, and we all drank it, and I gotta tell you, I woke up the next morning feeling pretty damn good. No problems. So whether it's vacations, weddings, birthdays, reunions, or just a good night out, get the most out of your upcoming plans by stocking up on your pre-alcohol now. You can do that by going to zbiotics.com/Julian to get 15% off your first order using code Julian, Julian, at checkout. Pre-alcohol is backed with 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied with your product, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So remember to head on over to zbiotics.com/Julian and use code Julian at checkout to get 15% off your first order. Thank you to ZBiotics for sponsoring this episode and our good times.
One, the hieroglyphs are not crude graffiti. They're hieroglyphs, divine incisions. They're actually intended to be magical by the priests and be indelible. Anyway, so, we have accounts even at Saqqara in Egypt, the Saqqara necropolis, right next to the deeply mysterious Serapeum, which we can talk about too, the Serapeum or Serapeum. Right next to it is the tomb of Ti or Tai. And inside that tomb, we have evidence in relief of them pulling giant seated statues. And it looks like they're slicking the pathway using something, some salts or something, some sort of it. I don't know what the actual process is, but to move it along. But we see the Egyptians actually moving the statues, and there's plenty of theories that are sufficient for moving it. The big one that stands out is how they lifted a lot of megalithic stone. That one I don't feel confident that I have an answer for that. And to be fair, Egyptologists, they try to explain a lot of things, but they'll often be very careful with their language and admit, this is a big problem. The Egyptologists admit to gaps in our knowledge. The alternative circles make it seem like all Egyptology is so definitive. That's not true. Papers go through peer review processes. Not all Egyptologists are aligned. You know, they have different ideas and theories that they're trying to work out. And they know that we have gaps in our knowledge. Big ones being, we don't know exactly how the Egyptians polished stone. We don't know yet exactly how the pyramids were built. There's a lot of great theories out there. You know, Houdin, there's a lot of theories. There's not one theory, I think, that takes the cake, but there's some really good ones. And I would say that if anybody's going to figure it out, it would be Doug over at History for Granite YouTube channel.
Why do you say that?
His mind, he is incredible. If you really want to go, like I'm a deep researcher and I'm an esoteric researcher, but I have a lot of different interests. Yeah. History for Granite YouTube channel is focused specifically on Old Kingdom pyramids and architecture mysteries. He knows the pyramids better than anyone, stone by stone, better than some Egyptologists even. History for Granite.
Can we pull it up? Give him a shout out.
I brought him to Egypt for the first time last year. I know him. Yeah.
History for Granted YouTube channel. And he does like all pyramid stuff.
All focuses on the pyramids. So if you really want an intense education about Old Kingdom pyramids in Egypt, he's your guy. And if anyone's going to figure out how they were built, it's him. He sent me out there recently on a mission to take photographs of every single stone of the south side of the Bent Pyramid because he's going to put it all together for a presentation. Yeah, this is History for Granite. Yeah, highly recommended.
Let's throw him a subscribe while we're at it so I can check this out later. Thank you, Les. Okay. Cool.
This is your guy.
Yeah.
If you're looking into it. Yeah, so I mean, he's done some really groundbreaking work. So in addition, what were we even talking about now?
We were talking about how they were moving.
Oh, yeah, so there's not a mystery in moving it, maybe lifting it. There's some ideas for it. I'm not going to say we don't know with certainty. The polishing. The stones in Peru, though, we don't know exactly how they were fashioned, on the andesite. And so some people think that they were like through vitrification, like that they were shapen somehow. Right, and there's different theories on this. There is an account that talks about being an eyewitness account to the indigenous people of the area using some sort of substance. I think they even referred to it as a red or pink. And so when I first got to Peru, which is just recently because I've been studying Egypt and Mexico and Turkey, and now, I'm starting to look more into South America. When I first got there, I was blown away because you can actually, we detailed and documented, we could see what looked like the presence of a pink or reddish, almost like a gypsum along the stone that almost looked like it was part of the stone. And we brought with us the technology, UV light. So we went back at night to try to get a closer look. I haven't published any of this yet. I'm going to be publishing the results on my YouTube channel hopefully soon. Cool. We looked into the cracks of the stone and we could see some of this inside. Is this part of the substance that they use to shape stone? We don't know. It is still one of the great mysteries, and I can't tell you I have an answer for it. But what we did find, my whole reason for this was saying that technology is going to change the landscape. I often talk about looking at things through an esoteric lens to take on a new perspective, to develop a wider understanding of something. But by using technology, we can also develop new perspectives. So we have this state-of-the-art, UV light that we brought to Maru Maru, which is a site that has like a niche in the wall, like an entrance. A lot of people say it's a portal, and they go through the portal. Right. People go there, meditate and stuff. You can see it with your eyes. It's absolutely amazing. We got up close, but we went at nighttime. We had a shaman ceremony. We had a local shaman with us. We set up for our group. And then we decided to go take a close look at the wall with the UV. And that's when we noticed handprints that have never been documented, never talked about. Why? Because you can't see them with the human eye. We needed technology to see these handprints, right? And so I can't say much more about that right now. We're still looking into it. It could be modern handprints. We don't know. It could be ancient paint, because that's not uncommon. In the Yucatan with the Maya, going back before the Maya civilization, at the Cave of Lultun, you have all these handprints. What
years are we talking for that?
Like there's some that go back like 10,000 years, maybe even more than 10,000 years. The Cave of Lultun has a very long history. In Maya times, they used it, after that heinous crime where Friar Diego de Landa burned all the Mayan codices. Well, not all of them, but the majority of what was left. Burned all the Maya books, their astronomical knowledge, their math, their medicine. Burned all the books and was trying to convert everyone, to their faith after they oppressed these indigenous people.
Yeah.
And they would specifically hunt down the shaman, and they would try to get the sons of the elite and the shaman, and then they would try to reform them and indoctrinate them. They would make them cut their hair. They would put them through schools and try to re-educate them through the lens of Christianity. And so a lot of shaman were rebelling. There was actually a war. There was a couple of wars, and they were running away from this. The shaman were running and seeking refuge in the caves. So they would go into Lultun Cave, and there's evidence of them there. But there's evidence of people way before them with the handprints. And even the Maya used handprints themselves, because you could go to the ancient archaeological site of Uxmal in the Yucatan, and you can see like the red print on the walls on Maya structures. So I don't know. Is this handprint ancient? We don't know yet. We're still trying to wrap our heads around that and do the research. But what I am saying is that no one's ever talked about this, and no one knows, because you can't see it without technology. And had we not used technology, we wouldn't know it was there. And this is just a small example,
What about, like, going back to some of the Egypt stuff, though? Like, with LiDAR technology, I'm just throwing out one random example right now, where it is. Isn't there so much more we can now learn if we're given access to be able to do it on these places? Like you were talking about technology making big moves in the next 50 years. Some of it seems like it's here for us to get answers to this, but there's still like a blockage of like who's allowed to use what where.
There is some of that. That's true. That exists, but there's also a lot that's been done. People be like, they need to scan the Giza Plateau. They've already scanned it. Rami Ramani, I think, did it for like a TV show. They've already done like a scan. There's been ground penetrating radar. There's tomography techniques. One that's being used or was recently used on Menkaure, the smallest pyramid, the Runt.
Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
And they did it on the east. This is when I was I had just moved back to the States earlier this year. When I was living in Egypt, one day I went to the Giza Plateau.
You were living near the Luxor.
I was living in Luxor, but I would go to Giza, I'd go to Aswan. So
okay. We're going to come to that in a minute.
Yeah, I was in Giza one day, and I noticed that they were doing all of the electrical tomography. They put all these little sensors on the pyramid. And it was the Scan Pyramids Project. I was like, Scan Pyramids Project? They were like, yeah. I was like, you're looking for the hidden entrance? They're like, maybe. And that's all they could say. What's the hidden entrance? A colleague of mine, Stein Vandenhoven, proposed several years ago that there may be a hidden entrance on the east side of the Menkaure Pyramid. He presented this before eminent Egyptologist Bob Breyer. He's the guy that does the whole series of ancient history on the great courses. A lot of people turn to him to get the whole history of Egypt. So I know we were talking about Luke before. Luke studied Bob Browley's work. So Bob's a well-known Egyptologist.
Luke, by the way, Luke was just in here and did like, Leslie, what was it, like 6 hours and 15 minutes straight of like the 27,000 year history of Egypt, and it was fucking incredible, bro. Like he was here over a year before that, right? And he had done a great job, but we did 2 episodes then too. One of them was all South America, another one was all Egypt. And what I love about Luke is he's such a humble student of the game. Like he felt like there were things on Egypt, but he's like, fuck, I haven't brushed up on this in a while. So as you know, like he went deep on that over the last year and a half, went to Egypt, spent a lot of time there, whatever, and bro, it was fucking amazing.
That's the thing, and I appreciate that. I watched that first podcast. There were a couple little things about the pyramids he got wrong, but he was just, he was more immersed in Maya studies. He was just kind of getting more into Egypt. Now he's had the opportunity to go there. He just
incredible.
We're co-leading a tour together this January. Me and Luke are doing awesome. The Secrets of the Sands tour. And then in September, I have my annual signature Esoteric Egypt tour.
Very cool.
Over at adeptexpeditions.com. Anyway.
We'll have that link in description. Remind me to put that there.
So, and please feel free to join us. So we'll be going back together. But I could really appreciate that he could take his time to learn more, come back, and then give you the history.
Yeah.
Bob Breyer's laid it out on the great courses, so you can find his work there. And so what he said, he went on Facebook and he was like, something to the extent of, I have been subject to many theories about the pyramids. Some of them, some interesting stuff, reasonable to conjecture. Many of them, not so much. But this one, I feel, has legs. The idea that there may be an entrance, a hidden entrance on the east wall, or a little cache or something on the east wall of the Menkaure pyramid. The reason for this, my colleague observed how there's like a little opening. It looks like somebody was trying to pry their way in through the stones that are there now. Looked back at some old photos, pieced the whole thing together, wanted me to go there because I was living in Egypt, wanted me to go there to film the whole course of stones from the north side where we have an entrance today and follow it around to the east side to see if it lines up. We think that happened during early Arab occupation where they were trying to burrow their way in because they thought there might have been an entrance.
Approximately when?
Well, this could have happened anywhere. But I would say this. We know that the Caliph of Cairo, what was that, the 8th century, 9th century, 9th century Caliph of Cairo? In between 8, 9, so in the 6, 7, 8, 900 AD, in that area, right? Because that's when they were breaching the pyramids. That's when information starts coming out through Arabic sources for the first time about the internal layout, of these pyramids, because they're going into them. In some cases, they, like the entrance you go into the Great Pyramid today, if you were to go there as a tourist and you buy the ticket to go into the Great Pyramid, you're not going through the original entrance the way the Egyptians intended it. You're going through the man-made, tunnel that Al-Mamun and his men made trying to find a way in, because originally, obviously, it probably wasn't visible. I don't know why or how at the time. There are the original entrance above it. There are accounts by Strabo. Strabo refers to a door that had a swivel that you could just like touch with a finger, a hand, and kind of like if you've ever been to Edward Lee Scallon's Coral Castle in Florida. It used to be called Rock Gate Park. You know about Coral Castle?
No.
Giant megalithic coral stones. This little frail old guy comes from Latvia, goes to Canada. He had tuberculosis, sick, old, sick, frail man, builds giant megalithic coral structure, all based on principles of magnetism right here in America. It was a mystery how he did it. And when asked, he said, I used the secret of the ancient Egyptians. Never said what the secret was, took it to his grave. People suspected that he was a Mason, had Masonic knowledge. I researched that, looked into it. I went to his grave where he's buried in the cemetery is not in the Masonic section. That doesn't necessarily vote him out as a Mason, but it's less likely. Anyway.
He's undercover in the afterlife.
He was a big inspiration for me early on. I studied coral. I went there numerous times. Anyway, it's a phenomenal place. And it used to be called Rock Gate Park. And he has this giant rock that you could, it was a rock gate that you could push with like your finger, and the giant megalithic stone swivels and you go through. Strabo said the Great Pyramid had one of those, and for whatever reasons, they didn't use the main entrance. Perhaps it wasn't visible or whatever the deal was, Al-Mamun burrowed his way through. That's on the Great Pyramid. So we're thinking on the small pyramid, Menkaure, that if where the entrance is today, if you follow it along that course, and it's hard to make out because the northeast corner has so much dilapidated stone. I couldn't give an accurate readout of what's going on. Anyway, long story short, he's already published papers about this, the possible hidden entrance on the east side. He contacted Scan Pyramids Project, let them know about it, and as a result, they were there. I can't say that's why they were scanning it, but I talked to the guys and they're like, maybe. Well, we found out something recently. A lot of people mock this, actually. A lot of people in the alternative space laughed about the idea of the hidden entrance on the east side of the Menkaure pyramid, and they could be right. But something new has unfolded. Just recently, in the last couple of years, at a small lecture with Zahi Hawass, he mentions the Scan Pyramids Project finding something on the east side. We have an eyewitness account that was there and reported this back to my colleague, my fellow researcher, who then went to Scan Pyramids Project and said, hey, did you guys find something? Now, they're very slow to publish everything. You're going to hear about it. You're hearing about it right now in a Julian Dorey podcast.
We're getting it exclusive.
It's exclusive. It's unofficial. The Egyptian authorities haven't published it yet. But eventually, they're probably going to get around to announcing the result. Scan Pyramids Project will eventually, hopefully, produce the results of what's on the east side. It could just be a cavity. It could be a cache. It could be a void. We don't know. But there was reason to speculate, just because of the arrangement layout of the temple, that there may be a hidden entrance on the east side. And so I think he's been in talks with the Scan Pyramids Project, and they said a paper has already been published. It's behind the ivory towers.
Can't get it. Okay.
It's in the ivory towers. They're doing the peer review process now. Well, they don't want a bunch of YouTubers to jump out the gate and stop making.
Yeah, and also let me see it from their perspective for a minute. It's just there's going to be people who are economically incentivized on YouTube and other places to automatically not only disagree with it but say the opposite is true before it even gets legs. So it's like the action and reaction thing all over again. I get that. It's just I wish we could have a better process where, and this is asking too much, but where say you had peer review in the public forum. Where you do, I don't know, have these fucking guys
Facebook.
go on Joe Rogan and
Twitter.
do it.
It's Joe Rogan.
Something.
It's
Yes.
Julian Dorey.
You know what I mean? Sure. But we got to figure out how to do that in the future. But I'm sorry. Please continue.
No, I mean, well, that's basically it. So they reported to him that it's in the works. They did find something and they're discussing it. All right. And so this is something I was talking about years ago. Hopefully it's going to come into fruition soon, and this will be a pretty big deal. If it is. I can't say with certainty it is, but
What do you, because we're kind of beating around the bush here of the pyramids and stuff. We talked a lot about the Sphinx, and we're talking about how they move some of these structures and stuff like that. I always ask people this because there's all different theories. We were talking about some in the last episode as well, which you're more than welcome to bring up again if you'd like to, if it's relevant. But what do you think the pyramids are?
Pyramids.
But what purpose do they serve?
I don't know.
Were they built to serve? You don't know.
We're told, or our general understanding is that the pyramids are tombs.
Right.
I personally don't think tomb is a good way to describe a pyramid.
Why not?
In the context of ancient Egypt. Because it's not exactly a tomb. And and what is a tomb? Who gets to define exactly what a tomb is? I would say that it has something more. I do believe that I don't think there's a human on this planet right now that can tell you exactly what there's plenty of alternative guys. There's Egyptologists will say, oh, we can, it's a tomb. And there's others that, alternative guys that have all sort of ideas, Giza power plants, chemical plant, this, that, astronomical clock. And there could be components, to the geometries or proportions or being like because there is a solar event that takes place at Giza, right? You have the equinoxes and the solstice, and there's an alignment where the sun actually sets in between the two pyramids almost perfectly, and then it rises again. So we do know that there's a solar, they likely built this intentionally with this solar theme in mind. The pyramid itself, though, when we look at the pyramids, we're awestruck. The sheer scale, the ingenuity, the sophistication, the giant megalithic stones, the use of granite. It's absolutely amazing. What we know in Egyptology is that they say it was used as a tomb for the pharaoh, which is a very basic understanding. There's still a lot of room to develop that understanding, even in Egyptology. What do you mean by tomb? Does it mean that the pharaoh was interred there and laid to rest forever? When we look at the evolution of tombs in Egypt, go back to the earliest pre-dynastic civilizations like the Naqada, the Badarian, and the people we found around Nekhen. They were buried in usually in little holes in the ground that were dug out in fetal position, right? Like you're sleeping, all crouched up. That was the earliest burials. Then you have the whole, and Luke's probably talked about this if he talked about the evolution of his history for Egypt. You have an evolution from the mastaba, which is in Arabic is like bench, and it was the burials. They'd build these burials, and then it takes place at Saqqara, where they start adding layers to it, and they flesh out the, what's supposed to be.
Yes, you went through all this.
Yeah, the pyramid, the Djoser step pyramid complex.
That was so cool to see that evolution.
Yep. And then it evolves over at Dashur. You have Snefru now. You've got the red pyramid, the bent pyramid, all before the Giza pyramids. They're not the oldest pyramids.
Right.
So by the time you're already in the fourth dynasty, there are pyramid building's been going on, but it was the Giza pyramids are the apex of pyramid building. Nothing has paralleled that since those fourth dynasty, Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure. Everything seems to scale down a little bit. Things evolve and change. Security features change. But
and they're so goddamn big.
They're enormous.
I mean, you've stood in front of it a million times, but even the couple times I did,
climbed to the top of it.
It's like, what? You know what I mean?
And that's one of the reasons why people are like, oh, this can't be tombs. Why would you go out of your way to build a big, massive pile of rocks just to bury a body? Well, when we say tombs, are we talking about something that the pharaoh is going to be in This is my point of evolution. It evolves even throughout Egyptian history because people now on the internet will be like, look at the Valley of the Kings. There are these long corridors with lots of hieroglyphs. Even in the 5th dynasty, the pyramid texts come into vogue. At the Pyramid of Unis at Saqqara is our first example of pyramid texts inside a pyramid, which is basically a series of spells to help guide you through the process of the afterlife. And so we know from this context that this pyramid, the Pyramid of Unis, which has a granite box for someone to be interred, it's talking about the afterlife. And then those texts, they weren't very pictorial back then. It was mostly just rows of texts of spells. Later in the New Kingdom, 1,000 years later, New Kingdom, ancient Egyptians, Valley of the Kings. This is over 1,000 years have elapsed. Now they're going into the ground, and there's an evolution that takes place there. First, they're sinking shafts. Then they go in an angle. Then they go into the mountain itself. Then they start, adding hieroglyphs. There's a whole evolution of tombs. So a lot of people will point out and be like, well, the pyramids don't have any hieroglyphs. Tombs, like in the Valley of the Kings, they have hieroglyphs. You're talking about an aspect of a civilization 1,000 years later. They've evolved. The New Kingdom tombs are not Old Kingdom style burials. Why do I think it was in a sense a tomb? But not, I would say yes, it was used in, I think tomb is not a good word to describe a pyramid. I would say that I do lean toward the idea that it was used toward the process for the afterlife. Are
you saying it could be because you don't, like, it almost seems like it's a semantics argument, if I'm hearing this correctly, like, because you don't want to say definitively, oh, it was just a tomb, you're leaving the door creaked open that there was something else, not necessarily sinister, but something else useful there.
I wouldn't say sinister, but definitely the way I feel is that there is something more to the pyramids we don't understand, and Egyptian burials and the afterlife and that whole process and the function of the pyramid. Now, when we say it was how do we know with certainty that the pharaohs that were supposedly allegedly put in these sarcophagi, granite boxes, inside the pyramids were laid to rest there for all eternity? How do we know that it wasn't for a specific period of time? And it's something we're missing, that the ancient Egyptian ontology, their thought process was like, first there's a whole period for the mummification process. Some 60, 70 days that it requires to go through this whole process for mummification. Who's to say they didn't have a process where they put the body inside, the stone for a specific period of time because their belief system was that somehow that fused with the afterlife, and then they, and then they move. I don't know. I can't say with certainty. It seems as though, because there are security features, the lids of the sarcophagi, the portcullis, which is like a trap door that prevents you from getting in, that they would seal shut. It does seem that they were trying to seal them. There's a pyramid. There's another pyramid at Saqqara where there's a unique sarcophagi or stone box inside. It's the only one of its kind that we found where it has this mechanism that allows like a trap door to shut down. And when they recently opened it up, when the Egyptologists opened it up, they had difficulty because it was like gypsum. So somebody sealed it shut, which means whatever's in there would probably still be in there because most of the other stuff has been looted. A lot of people will say they're not tombs because we've never found a body inside the pyramids.
Yes.
What you have to realize is that after the Old Kingdom, there was a period, an intermediate period, a period of instability, where things were in turmoil and there was upset and different people trying to fight for powers and struggle.
But they would steal everybody.
They would go in and steal. They would go in and it's likely people who already knew how to breach the system would go back in and steal whatever was there. All right. So,
but they would be able to steal every single body. You see what I'm saying? Like all these intricate, designs within the pyramid. You're saying they didn't miss one?
There's over 100 pyramids in Egypt.
Yeah.
People don't realize that. They think of Giza, they think of 3,
right.
and there's a few more. It's over 100. We've already, taken a look at all of them, and they've been excavated, they've been run through. For the most part, we can't. Well, there's actually later pyramids we have found bodies, so we do know. Like even in Luxor, on the west bank of Luxor is the El Medina, which is the workman's village. These were the artisans and masons who were crafting the Valley of the Kings for the pharaohs. It was secret knowledge. They had to go up around the back of the mountain. Likely they were blindfolded and brought to the Valley of the Kings where they would do the work. And it was a secret. Nobody was supposed to know this is where we were burying people. And then they would come back and they would use the same techniques in their village. In their village, in their settlement, is a pyramid. It's almost, it's inspired. It's like a Kushite pyramid, like a Nubian pyramid that you see closer to Sudan, a true pyramid, which is a shrine to a tomb. So we know that they were used as tombs. They were used in the afterlife process. people will say that because they're so big and so massive and no bodies have been found inside and there's no hieroglyphic inscriptions, we can't say with certainty they're tombs. So now we can make up all other theories about what they are. I'll say that, you know what? Let's look at the context. To begin with, you have the River Nile, all life. The Nile was the gift of Egypt. On the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, which are united to give us Egypt. Then there are two other lands, the East Bank and the West Bank. Yeah. East Bank of the Nile was about life. We talked about how in the last episode, how the sun would rise in the east. Correct. And then it would go to, there was no word for death. It would go to west. It'd go in the west.
Go to the underworld.
Yeah. So the way that Egypt is laid out, I don't know if you realize this, but the right side, the East Bank of the Nile is all the houses of life, the temples, the mansions of the gods, the temples where gods are supposed to, Necheru, come down and inhabit the temple. Mm-hmm. That was life, houses of life. Mystery schools were called houses of life. West Bank of the Nile, life, where the sun rises. Where the sun sets in the west, where I lived on the west bank of the Nile in Luxor. I was 5 minutes from the Valley of the Kings, Hatshepsut's temple. You go on the roof of my house. You could look across the river and see the Luxor temple. I was in the center of everything. I was a 5-minute walk to the giant colossi of Memnon. I was right there in the village with the people. And so on the west bank is death. It's where you go to die. It's where you put the necropolises in most cases. So Giza is a necropolis. There's evidence that it might have been an early settlement, but it was a necropolis. It's all burials. It's mastaba. Most of the Giza Plateau, aside from the pyramids, are mastaba fields, right? So you have all these burials in a necropolis. You go up or you go along the Nile, you come to Saqqara, which is a necropolis where you have pyramids. You go all the way, the whole west bank of the Nile, it's all these necropolises or burials. And then you have these pyramids in the center of a necropolis, which is associated with the afterlife. You don't put a chemical processing plant or,
why not?
Or in the middle of a cemetery. What cemetery do you know that has a Best Buy in the middle of it?
Yeah, I don't have that, but I'm saying, like, is there things don't have to make sense as we understand things to make sense in our life now. Human culture is weird. Right. It does change. So, like, what is, because you're getting towards, like, what that guy Landa Kem says, where he thinks, and I think, if I remember correctly, Christopher Dunn has a similar
Christopher
theory.
Dunn's a pioneer.
Right.
The short of all of that, you have, you have Max, well, the real pioneer would be Flinders Petrie. He was an early Egyptologist. Some of his methods are questionable now, but they still rely on him as a reliable source. He did a lot of measurements, did a lot of work in Egypt, and he noted a lot of unusual tool marks, which look like things that the Egyptians couldn't produce with what we have on record. Copper can't exactly grind in the chisel unless you have an abrasive, right? So Petrie was really the pioneer. And then in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, you have this whole movement, pyramid power. People are fascinated with the pyramids. You have this guy, Max Thoth. There was another guy. Max Thoth wrote the book, Pyramid Power. It was like a cult book. It was a big following. And he talks about the pyramids almost like it's an energy center power plant, but had no science to back it up. Along comes engineer. Well, I don't know if he's actually an engineer, but along comes Christopher Dunn. And I've toured with Christopher Dunn. I've been in Egypt. Right. I did his very last tour of Egypt ever. He said he wasn't going to do any more tours after this. I don't know if he changed his mind, but his very last tour was with me. And one of his early tours that led to the works in his book was with my mentor, John Anthony West. In fact, Christopher Dunn co-signed my book. If you look at the beginning of the book, he has
The Adept Initiate's Guide to Luxor Temple,
yeah,
which we're going to talk about soon.
Right on the first page, he gives an endorsement. He mentions how he's toured with John Anthony West and me, and basically how, he had a great experience each time. Anyway, Christopher Dunn is kind of like the OG pioneer of bringing the science to lost ancient technologies. That's his narrative.
Got it.
Okay. It builds upon an older narrative, which Graham has taken ownership of, which is the lost civilization theory, which precedes Graham. I told you, you have even St. Yves Delvatre was talking about.
Graham is just the modern day guy.
Modern guy. So, and now you have all these new YouTubers, Uncharted X and Bright Insight and Brian Forrester, who have picked up on Chris Dunn's work.
Yes.
Right? In our whole space developed in this way on YouTube, right? Because previously everything was books and conferences. And then we have to really credit Brian Forrester. I don't see him as a trustworthy source when it comes to research. He gets a lot wrong. But we have to credit him with, it's just like Ancient Aliens. There's a lot of stuff I don't agree with on Ancient Aliens, but it does have a positive aspect, and it introduces people to a lot of these sites like Pumapunku that you might not have heard of otherwise. And Brian was a pioneer in the sense that he was the first bringing this stuff to the YouTube space. We got to credit him with that. People were watching Ancient Aliens. They wanted to know who these people were. They would look them up online, and then you would find Brian on YouTube. And he was basically doing Ancient Aliens in real life and leading tours. From that, and I was already at the same time traveling and researching, and I saw that, and I said, oh, he's putting it on YouTube. Then more YouTubers started popping up, and then over time, Jimmy Bright Insight was inspired by Brian Forster. Right. He admits that. And so he's learning from a guy who learned from the Kemet School, who learned from Chris Dunn. Chris Dunn put a book out on lost technology. 10 years later, Brian Forster, after going on a tour with Chris Dunn, puts a book out on lost technology. Chris Dunn would provide in-depth explanations. Brian Forster would take a few of his words, repeat it in camera. That's how his YouTube channel built up. And he became the lost technology guy. It's almost like Chris Dunn was forgotten in a sense on the internet, on YouTube. For many years, it was Brian. You want lost technology? It's Brian's channel. And then, now there's others that have picked up the torch in a sense and are doing a great job with that narrative. So yeah, that's kind of like a brief history of how this whole thing came in. And Christopher Dunn, he's gone around and looked at a lot of these tool marks. He's really the one that kind of brought about this whole idea of inheritance theory. The idea that the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians, dynastic Egyptians don't have the specific tools that he says are required to, leave these tool marks on record, on the archaeological record, and therefore it couldn't have been the Egyptians, which now opens up implications that it must be, you could say aliens, or you could say lost civilization. And we go further back in this whole alternative history. You got Von Daniken, right? Before Sitchin, you had Von Daniken in the 60s. Magicians, chariots of the gods.
Of the gods, yep.
What's it all about? All these ancient sacred sites, it's aliens. Along comes Graham in the 90s, flips one word, magicians of the gods. Yeah. Not aliens, humans in a higher state of consciousness, but not the dynastic Egyptians, lost civilization. And so this whole idea of inheritance theory, the idea that the Egyptians couldn't do it, I have a problem with this because number one, the Egyptologists, it's very rare that they conclude. I mean, there are conclusions. There's established texts. But often you'll find in their papers and academic journals, they're exploring. They don't always give a definitive answer. A lot of times you'll see they preface their words with likely or perhaps because they're trying to be careful because they know.
Well, that's fine. I'm cool with that.
Yeah. And then
they should do that.
We know that, yes, copper can't directly impact granite to make some of these marks, but if you use the right abrasives, in tandem, and likely they were using their surroundings, natural surroundings. So I wouldn't say lost technology, more like lost technique, lost knowledge. And the alternatives will always say, well, the Egyptologists, that's not true. The Egyptologists literally say we have gaps in our knowledge.
Did you say on the last episode when this came up very quickly, did you say you had like a chemist go in or someone and assess from like that standpoint whether or not it could have been that and they found no evidence?
Specifically speaking to land of chems theory, I had a chemist and a metallurgist. When his theory first came out, quickly became popular. Johanna James was on one of my tours, and someone had came out to meet me on my tour, and he knew the land of chem guy, and he mentioned it to her. And she became interested, and immediately after the tour, she featured him and did a video. She has a huge YouTube following, so he got a lot of traction. And then shortly after, I think he was on the Danny Jones, and now
I've talked with him. Nice guy.
He's making some waves. So I've talked with him too. I didn't have the same experience. He doesn't like me. I've tried to cite references and show him stuff in Egyptology, and he doesn't want to be corrected. I was blocked on his YouTube channel. He took to Instagram to attack me, and whatever. Point is, I don't care about the personalities. It's the actual argument, okay? What he's trying to say, and so Chris Dunn has the Giza power plant theory. And in between them, J.J. Hertek wrote a book, The Giza Industrial Complex. So it's similar theory. And then the land of chem comes and changes it a little bit. Now it's a chemical processing, situation where they were using these to process certain chemicals. But
what chemicals?
You have to go through it. And it's been a while. And to be honest with you, I've stopped looking at the material because I reached a point where I'm just like, I'm wasting my time. Time is valuable. It's a fascinating theory. Sensationalism written all over it. It's perfect for podcasts. It's perfect for clickbait. But I pulled in a metallurgist and a chemist. I gave them the entire presentation. I went through everything with them. I have my Egyptological perspective because I could see certain things he was saying demonstrates a lack of Egyptology. And when I talked to these guys, and I realized that, if his education isn't all the way there on Egyptology, I'd have to question his, education and chemistry as well. I'm not a chemist. I can't speak to that. I did pull in a chemist, metallurgist. They went through everything. Both of them agree that these claims are baseless.
Based on what? Like, what did they find?
Man, we would have to do a whole entire, to go back into, I couldn't articulate it well enough now. This is over a year. This is going back like a year or two.
Do you have a video on this?
No, but I was maybe, it's not on the top of my priority list. I would maybe make one addressing it because I have all the notes. I have everything. I just need time to wrap my head around it and construct the argument.
Yeah,
I have like like on the John and James video in a comment section, I gave a bunch of points. I forget a lot of them now, but I gave a bunch of points on why his theory doesn't work.
Yeah, if you have that, you should do something public, whether it be a publication or some sort of video reviewing the evidence, just so it's out in the public square and we can play the game the right way, and he can have a chance to look at those points as well. I think, because again, I like to make peace in these scenarios. I want everyone's working on the same thing. Everyone wants to find out the truth, right? So everyone, if you play nice in the sandbox, everyone can be a part of that solution. It doesn't mean you have to be right about everything. But I think if you did actually take the time to have some quote-unquote experts come in there, a metallurgist and a chemist to break this down, like, the people should see that 100%.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And and I'm all on board with unity. And I'm cool with, coexisting with opposing opposites.
Right.
I've had people on my tours that I don't agree. I've co-led a tour with Christopher Dunn. We were great friends at the time. And, I didn't subscribe to his theory. I didn't wholeheartedly believe in it. And after the tour, I believed in it even less. When he took me on the Giza Plateau and there's these boat pits, and he thinks that they were actually giant saw pits, that they weren't boat pits. And then when we went to, Egyptian Museum, there's a statue of Ramses, and he's telling me that he doesn't believe it's the statue itself is the product of the statue with its signature Nemes headdress isn't the product of the ancient Egyptian civilization, that they came along later and added their crude graffiti. There is usurping in Egyptology. The Egyptologists, this isn't nothing new. The Egyptologists know that the Egyptians were usurping earlier Egyptians. In fact, it happens quite frequently, even within the 18th dynasty. Horemheb comes along and crosses out Tut's name. Seti comes along and crosses out his name. And they're always usurping one another and adding their name during their time. This thing happens. But, when you have the stylistic features in the statue, you have the Nemes headdress of the pharaoh, which doesn't have a precedence before dynastic Egypt. And Chris Dunn's like, we'll prove it. We'll prove that it did it. The burden of proof is on you to show that it did. We don't have any evidence that it existed.
Right.
So what he's trying to say is the statues were fashioned before the ancient Egyptian civilization, and then the Egyptians came along and just threw their hieroglyphs on top of it. And to me, it's sort of the same problem with the ancient aliens theory. You're taking accomplishment away from the higher consciousness of the human individuals that actually did this. Let's give the dynastic Egyptians their flowers. It's a big mistake, in my opinion, to undermine the intelligence and sophistication of the ancient Egyptians.
Well, and at the same time, though, and I would agree, because obviously along the way, there's incredible things that they did. People can argue over whether or not it was this thing or that thing, or this one had outside influence, whatever that was. But like overall, as a civilization, it's unbelievable, and I don't want to understate that, but like I think you make a good point in the sense that the argument of, well, you don't have enough proof, so therefore my thing that also doesn't have enough proof must be right, is literally pointing the finger from the glass house. It's like the Spider-Man meme where the Spider-Mans are like pointing at each other, and I feel like you're giving an example of it there with Chris looking at the establishment. I feel like we run into that in this field all the time.
Yeah. I try to be slow on the draw to say, I'm right and you're wrong, and also to have hardcore, as a practicing Rosicrucian, we practice tolerance, and we try to look at things through multiple lenses. We find that it's best to try not to conclude. Some things you can conclude on, and you can always align yourself with universal principles because they will never fail you. Everything else we have to, operate with the understanding that we're operating with our own limited understanding. And if you say that to most people, they'll be offended. Well, you're operating with your own limited understanding. You'll feel like I'm being condescending. That's the objective truth. We don't all know everything. But that's why it's important. Let's put our evidence out for our narrative. Chris is saying that, there's no evidence to prove those statues predate the ancient Egyptians. He's trying to say because there's tool marks that we can't, definitively prove the ancient Egyptians. But when you look at the preponderance of evidence, there's a lot of nuances. And when you look at the statues, we don't find the stylistic features or statues that size anywhere before in Egypt in the dynastic Egyptian civilization. Not only that, for me, the big one was the boat pits. Christopher Dunn believes there was a giant semicircular saw. A boat pit, if you go to Giza Plateau, they have boat pits. They didn't find any, but this is always the case, right? You have tombs, you didn't find any pharaohs, so they can't be tombs. You have boat pits, we didn't find any boats, so they can't be boat pits. You go to the Serapeum, the Apis bull burial boxes, didn't find any bulls, so they can't be bulls. But that's bullshit, because we actually did find a boat in one boat pit at Giza, the Khufu solar boat. But in the interest of fairness, that pit is stylistically different from the others. But those stylistic features, and I've had boatmen come on my trips, yachtsmen, they're like, this has all the whole, one of them was on the trip with Chris Dunn. Some people came for the esoteric stuff, some people came for the lost technology. Chris gave his presentation on why he thinks what Egyptologists are saying on boat pits is actually for a giant circular saw that would have cut the stones for the Great Pyramids on demand. The way he explains it is that, the foreman, because all the stones are not perfect. They're not all perfectly precise and shaped. When you look at the core masonry of the pyramids, it's all kind of erratic. And so you would need a specific shape to fit on spec. So he's saying they would have the saw there on site and they would be able to cut it down on spec and deliver it to the pyramids, which, if we subscribe to the conventional chronology of ancient Egypt, 4th dynasty. These boat pits are 5th dynasty. They have all the signature hallmarks. So these boat pits didn't even come until after the 4th dynasty. And they have all the features that one would need for a boat pit. And we actually did find boats. Not at Giza, but we found boats in the boat pit at Saqqara. We found them next to Abydos. Few people know about. You got to dig deep in the archaeological record to find this stuff. So I told Chris, I believe there are boat pits. All the science studying this stuff, knowing that they look like 5th dynasty boat pits to me, I don't see how it would be a giant semicircular saw. And then there's a lot of other issues with it. It's not that simple. There's a lot of nuances to it.
Yeah.
But,
Now, you've mentioned several different times today, obviously, like your scope of places you go around the world, all these different sites on different continents and stuff like that. And one of the things I always like to bring up to some of the ancient history guys I bring in here, just because, I get some different answers, and also it kind of keeps me up at night sometimes, is the parallel structures we find around the world. And you've already mentioned some earlier, like in the last episode when you talk about the Mayas and stuff. It's like, we see pyramids in all different places. And I try to think of like some conventional reasons for that. Like, you don't just have to jump to like, oh, that means aliens did it. It's not necessarily what I'm saying. But like, are there civilizations older, if you want to use like Atlantis or something like that? I don't care what it is. Insert civilization here, one we don't know about, one that we speculate about, whatever it is. Are there civilizations that could have existed that tied the basis of structures like a pyramid, which could be one of many different things, to each other around the world, and that is the nature of how this technology was able to exist? Do you think that's possible?
So you're asking why we see similar features across the ocean, oceans apart, and yet you have pyramids.
Yes, and under the ocean, if you look off the coast of Cuba and things like that, we see these things.
There's pyramids off the coast of Cuba?
Yeah.
I wasn't aware.
Yeah, they're way deep. Can we actually pull that up? Pyramids off coast of Cuba. It's a digital re-rendering.
Bimini Row? You're not talking about Bimini Row. Coast of Cuba.
That doesn't sound...
I remember a television program in the 80s, In Search of, with Leonard Nimoy, that talked about a crystal pyramid underneath the ocean.
I don't remember the terminology. I'm going to get it wrong, but that would have been episode 153 or 154 with Matt LaCroix. We went through that. There it is, the first one on the top left, Alessi. So this is if we can click the first one on the top left. This is a digital re-rendering of what was found. I forget how far off the coast of Cuba, but this is the bottom of the ocean
rendering?
floor.
I don't know enough about this, so I would need to ask a lot of questions. To begin with, who rendered it? How do I know this isn't Photoshop?
I don't remember. It's not Photoshop.
Okay.
It was a real finding. I hope to God I'm right about that.
I need to know. I don't know that. I haven't dug into this.
Can we go to all, Alessi, off of images, so that we can see some sources here. Okay. Yes, there's an underwater formation off the coast of Cuba that some believe to be a submerged granite structure complex, including pyramids. In 2001, BBC News announced the discovery of the formation using scanning equipment. So it was it was a legit discovery. Now, if people want to say like, "Oh, BBC got it wrong," I guess you can argue
the media
that,
says stuff that doesn't necessarily mean something. So the media is media. BBC, what is that?
But don't you think they'd be in that type of media? They'd be the people poo-pooing shit like this rather than actually playing it up.
Sensationalism? Headlines thrive off
not
that.
sensationalism, but like when it comes to the
BBC's
establishment teachings of history, oh no, don't question that.
So maybe there is something to. I don't know with certainty. I haven't studied it. So, I don't feel qualified to speak on it. I'd have to look into it.
Well, let me read it.
Okay,
Yeah, and
sure.
that's I appreciate that.
Scroll
That's
up.
fair.
Let's see
Scroll
the
up,
headline.
Yeah, scroll all the way up. Okay, so
Cuban underwater
sonar. This is straight off of Wikipedia, which could be run by the CIA.
So just to be clear, though, this says formation and not pyramid. So they could just be rock formations.
Right. So sonar images interpreted as being symmetrical and geometric stone structures resembling an urban complex were first recorded in early 2001, covering an area of 2 square kilometers at depths of between 600 meters and 750 meters, which is approximately 2,460 feet. The discovery was reported by Pauline Zalitsky, a marine engineer, and her husband Paul Wenswig, owners of a Canadian company called Advanced Digital Communications, working on exploration and survey mission in conjunction with the Cuban government. The team, that's a little sketchy, working with the Cuban government. The team returned to the site at a second time with an underwater remotely operated vehicle that filmed sonar images interpreted as various pyramids and circular structures made out of massive smooth blocks of stone that resembled hewn granite. Zalitsky said, "It's a really wonderful structure which really looks like it could have been a large urban center. However, it would be totally irresponsible to say what it was before we have evidence," which is fair. Okay, so scroll down, Leslie. After studying the image, National Geographic senior editor John Ekave said, "They are interesting anomalies, but that's as much as anyone can say right now. I'm no expert on sonar, and until we are able to actually go down there and see, it will be difficult to characterize them." All right, so in fairness to you, they're taking your side of like, let's not get forward to that.
Yeah.
Either way, like, remove this example
let's
too.
do this
if
real
I
quick though. To hit the X down the bottom where it says maybe later, hit X, and let's look at the references, because forget all the verbiage in the actual. Let's look at the sources.
BBC
Be a gangster
News.
and go with the source. Okay,
Yeah.
BBC, which doesn't mean anything in a yes, they have a
click
certain
that.
standard. Don't click it yet. They have a certain standard. But at the same time, they're fed press releases. You can hire a company. This is how Billy Carson got on. He used to hire publishing companies to produce articles about him early on. You can. I know it's from the music industry.
But get to the BBC with that too.
BBC has a higher standard of things, but BBC has also published stuff that.
Yeah, they definitely get shit wrong.
Look, I just want to see what all the references are. Okay.
New underwater finds raise
these
questions
just blogs
about
or these
National Geographic, St. Petersburg Times, Daily News, Bowling Green, Kentucky.
All right, Daily News and the Times,
Reuters, Havana.
Now, somebody picked up the press release and they started
I
writing
see
about it.
what you're saying. I'm not gonna. There's reason to poke holes.
I'm not saying
for
that there aren't formations. I don't know, and I would be foolish to even comment on it because I haven't looked into this. But my guess is, okay, there probably are, based on what they're saying. It's likely there's formations. Are they pyramids? I don't know. Is that image an actual image from this event?
It's a sonar rendering.
Is it a sonar rendering?
That's what she said.
Or is
that's
what
Kalitsky
who said?
That's what Kalitsky said.
Where? Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but the one we're looking at, is that the actual sonar rendering, or is that something somebody made for a blog article to accompany this?
I can't remember. I can't. I don't want to get
Right.
shit wrong.
So just because we have an image with the news, somebody could have ran that through AI, make me an underwater formation, and then use the image.
This was before AI. I do know that.
Okay, fair enough. Somebody could have went on Photoshop and made an image. I'm just saying that
Possible.
I don't know what that image is. If it is the actual, that's what sonar looks like, because that's pretty clear. Where's that image?
Go back to the image, Alessi.
I mean, this will require some research work. I'd have to spend another at least 30 minutes to get more insight.
Right there.
Yeah. See, is this image the actual sonar printout, or who's responsible for this image? Whose camera is this taken from? Who created this? These are the questions you want to ask. Because on a surface level, you're going to assume that is the data. Data results that I see of underground images never look like that.
All right, an
Never that clear.
anthropologist affiliated with the Cuban Academy of Sciences has said that still photos were taken from the videotape clearly show symbols and inscriptions. Weinzweig said it is not yet known in what language the inscriptions are
What
written.
website is
the
this?
sonar
in the
images,
URL?
Vive Free Press.
Okay, Vive Free Press. All right, I don't this source to begin with.
Yeah, no,
I'm
I'm cool with poking holes in sources. That's great. The sonar images he added bear a remarkable resemblance to the pyramidal design of Mayan and Aztec temples in Mexico. I am totally cool with hold on one second. I just want to say this. I'm totally cool with poking holes in stories like this and in sources like this. I think that's great, and I think having a guy from your space doing it is even better. So especially when I'm trying to remember something that was in an earlier podcast that someone else brought up that I haven't looked at in a while, I always need to say this, like, this is why we got to go on and check it, because there could be holes in it for sure.
Sources.
And so either way, though, I don't want to get lost in the main point here. This one was an underwater example in Cuba.
Yeah.
All the ones we do know about, though, that are above water on fucking land that we can look
Giza
at,
Plateau.
which is where I should have stayed, to be honest. That's my fault, everybody. But like when we look, it was good shit, and I like you poking
before
holes.
we move off it, I could poke some final holes. If you could just go back, I just want to bring this to people's consciousness when you're doing research. Okay, scroll up. Notice the first image, the featured image, has no citation, no credits. The one in that we're talking about. Okay, that's fine. Scroll down. Now we have a map of where it is. And there's an actual citation now. Map showing this, blah, blah, blah. Scroll down. Now we have the image again with the map, but this time we have no citation. There's no credit or reference. And look, the image on the left.
That's AI. I mean, that's a re-rendering of something. I don't know if that's AI, but like someone drew a picture. Yeah.
But if the average person reading the headline and in all credulity just scrolls through this, they're going to assume there's these pyramids under the water. No, what there is apparently is some formations that look like it could be a settlement, according to these people who said this, who got a press release out to a bunch of people.
Could be. Yeah.
But you make a great point.
Yeah, back to the point of
Giza
the above
Plateau,
ones we know about. Yeah.
Right next to the Sphinx across the street is the village of Nazat Saman in the city, where there's all houses and stores, the Pizza Hut. Underneath all of those houses are still burials. There's so much more. There's literally there's a whole underworld to Giza. And I am going to be putting a YouTube video on this because I have been places underground at Giza, few eyes ever get to see. Tourists are not allowed to go. I've seen things. I've seen giant rock-cut statues, rock-cut stone figures underground at Giza that you don't see in any book, anywhere on the internet. Right? There's all these chambers. Why do they keep this? They don't like people to go into these areas of Giza, and they put security up around them. Why? They're covering it all up. No. They don't want somebody to stumble along and fall in a shaft and break their neck. And then there's a news article out on how a tourist got hurt in Egypt. And it's understudied and underpublished. They can only do so much. Egypt has so much undiscovered stuff. And they have a lot that they've discovered that they don't talk about because they only have so much time, so much resources, so much money. And unfortunately, archaeology seems to take a backseat to tourism. So if it's not something that's convenient for a tourist bus to get to, and that tourists are why are they going to go spend all this money, and put something into something when they could be focusing on sites that people are actually going to? So there's a lot of reasons. There's politics, there's red tape, but there's also good reasons why they're not looking into some of these things. But we know there's an entire diagram from Harvard that shows, and Lepsius, one of the early expeditions, they already have a layout of the Giza underground. There's so many passages and tunnels. Some people will stretch the truth and say that there's a tunnel extending from Giza to Saqqara. They get this from Hakim Ayawan of the chemist school. This is not true. I knew the guy who grew up with Hakim, one of his best friends who lived right next door to him. He said there's no such tunnel that exists. He said there's tunnels underground.
Where did that rumor come from?
Apparently from Hakim Ayawan or students of Hakim. It comes from the chemist school. So I've heard Jimmy Bright Insight repeat it. I've heard Bennett Uncharted X repeat it. They say Yusuf Ayawan's father, they all learned from Yusuf. Yusuf Ayawan's father, Hakim Ayawan, said that there is a tunnel that connects, as a child he went through. But when you ask his son Yusuf, because I've seen him in YouTube videos where people directly ask him, he turns his head to the side and goes, I cannot confirm. And when I ask people that grew up with his father in the village, that know Giza like the back of their hand because they played in every shaft and tunnel. They know it. Those people know it. They were there as kids. They know it better than anybody. And so they're like, no, and the fact that there's no precedence for such a long, you can't.
But the intricacy and brilliance of the Egyptian ones aside, when you just look at the structural layout of ones around the world, how do we explain that?
Ones are what? Tombs, shafts, tunnels?
No, forget the word tombs.
Okay.
The fucking pyramids.
Yeah.
The things that are
Why do we have similar
Yeah.
features? And it ain't just the pyramids. You've got the dovetail, the mortise and tenon,
Sure.
the clamp that goes inside that brings two stones together. That's the unusual one for me. It's like, man, all these, you have it in Japan, China, you have it in Meso-America, South America, you have it in Egypt. It's all over the world where you have, John Anthony West would say a mortise and tenon. Some people refer to them as dovetails with a clamp that goes in between. It's to hold the masonry, two joints together in masonry. And we see that feature all over. Some of them have metal, some of them have stone, some of them have wood. When you come to Egypt with me, I know where they're all at in Egypt. There's one hidden in the top of a stone in Philae. There's one in Hatshepsut's temple that is wood, petrified wood that's thousands of years old. There's an example hidden behind the obelisk at the Luxor temple. There's one in stone. And then there's some in copper, which are more modern. Even the modern authorities are still using this technique. How did this technique spread across the world? You got the step pyramid Saqqara, there's step pyramids all over Meso-America.
Yes.
I'm not totally this. So basically, we're talking about the difference between isolationist theory and diffusionism. The idea that cultures spread out across the world, and with that exchange of knowledge and trade, the knowledge went along with the trade. Then there's the concept that's maintained, the cherished paradigm is more isolationist theory, that these cultures did not have contact with other sources. That's a part of academia in the ivory towers I'm not entirely aligned with. I would be willing to bet that there were unaccounted, voyages and expeditions to places from different places. There's just so much of it. We know that there was, where Egypt is, we know there was an exchange between the Levant, across the water in the Mediterranean. We know the Mycenaean culture, and, they have Egyptian artifacts in Egypt. There's stuff that looks like it might have been inspired by the Minoans or and so you have a lot of similarities. How did it happen without travel? Is it possible to happen? So I think it's possible that somebody went around and shared information. I think that is still, academia probably wouldn't agree with me. I think there's a possibility there. It needs to be explored. But let's look at the other side now. How could this happen? Well, there's also the idea that as humans, we coexisting at the same time, we have the same, I said before, in the other episode, 5 basic needs: food, clothing, medicine, shelter. And these are 5 human problems that everything we do is geared towards solving those problems. I got to provide a living, to keep shelter, to get clothes, so humans are faced with the same problems, same challenges. And we're talking about a pyramid. It's a geometrical shape, right? And those shapes often have meaning. And we find in many cultures, indigenous traditions, a lot of the meanings tend to, be the same when you're pointing up. So why do cultures have triangles in their architecture? Why do they use squares in their architecture? But I agree. Yes, there's pyramids, there's step pyramids. How could that happen? Hey, it's possible. People, I think we shouldn't put close the door on that there possibly could be trade. I think there's other alternative explanations. A big one that I'm on, and you might not agree, it comes from the source.
The source.
What is a pyramid? It's a triangle. It's a geometric shape, the geometries. It may come from some sort of divine. So the ancient Egyptians were telling us that they were communicating with the gods. Shamans all over the world, even today, indigenous traditions, are going within, making offerings, and connecting with the divine. People
Plural.
who practice meditation.
Plural.
Divines?
No, well, you said gods before that.
Gods or God.
Okay.
When I say gods, so there's creator. You can call him God or her or him, or no gender. You can call it Allah. It's creator. There's one universal, undifferentiated consciousness that becomes aware of itself, and everything emanates out from that, which we're a product of. So that's creator, the grand architect of the universe. But then there's the ancient Egyptians, for example, viewed all of creation as one giant act of creation. Everything they did was sacred, whether plowing the ground, planting seeds, making offerings. They were sacred acts. And all of creation is fused with these spiritual energies known as the Necheru. Remember the other episode I said a Necher, which today Hollywood would refer to as the gods of Egypt, but they were a Necheru for the Egyptians. A Necher, which later probably becomes nature, is principles of nature or aspects of cosmology. So there's astrological cycles that take place up above right? We know the precession of the equinoxes, the constellation of stars. You have the great year. We know about these cycles and events. And astrology is based on the astronomy, suggesting that it has an impact on, planet and humanity. In a general sense, you think about how the moon affects the tides of the ocean. Moon affects tides of the ocean.
Yes.
Rest records are high because we're mostly comprised of water. We have water within us. When there's a full moon, people tend to go a little crazy. It seems to have an impact. A celestial body seems to have an impact on us.
Right, metaphysical in a way.
Metaphysical. It is metaphysical because we can scientifically, not metaphysically, physically, supposedly prove that the moon has an effect on the tides of the ocean, right?
Yeah.
And it affect water. And so my whole point is that so if there's an influence up there, and this is important for the ancient people, these cycles and this influence, maybe not even the influence itself, because we don't know if the ancient Egyptians even had astrology in the way we think of it. They likely didn't. It doesn't seem to come into vogue until the later periods of Egypt. They had a profound understanding of the cosmos, but maybe not astrology the way we view it today. And then, you have this whole reverence for the sky. So where I'm trying to go with this is, where was I going with this? You have the whole,
the weave is coming together.
The weave is coming together. You express it in a way that the ancient Egyptians could explain to the initiates, the initiated priesthood, what these things are. So you have this is cosmic, I'm talking about cosmic wisdom. And so they have a god for that. They have a Netcher, Thoth, or Thoth, or Tahut, depending on what school of pronunciation, so Thoth, or Thoth, the ibis-headed god. He had the body of a man, represented in our likeness, with the head of an ibis, sometimes depicted as a baboon. Generally speaking, he was the god of wisdom, writing, and magic. Best viewed as the principle of cosmic wisdom. Thoth is a Greek corruption of the ancient Egyptian word Jehuti or Tehuti. In fact, even the Egyptians today, when you go to Egypt, they'll be Thoth. So that becomes Thoth. From Tahuti or Jehuti. So he's the cosmic principle of wisdom. He's the one that brought the hieroglyphic language to the Egyptians in the mythology. He gave them what they call the Medu Netcher. It meant divine or sacred, Netcher, Medu, language, the sacred language of the gods, which later the Greeks call hieroglyphs. Hiero means divine, glyph means incision. So the Greeks are like, this Medu Netcher, this is hieroglyphs, divine. He's the divine prince. So in order to, how do you express cosmic wisdom? Look how difficult it is to try to explain it here on a podcast. We get an image and we use, different characteristics of the ibis bird and its intelligence, and we'll use this for a symbol of that. And that's how the gods come to be. You've got Thoth, Isis, Iset, Osiris, Horus. They're all archetypal expressions, personifications of cosmic principles and natural principles. When it rains, there's a name for that. When the wind blows, there's a name for that. These were the gods. So when I say gods plural, I'm referring to all the Egyptian gods and its spiritual energies within the universe, not the one creator.
Right, but you're saying that the explanation could be that there's the source of that is the divine intervention of them being able in these different civilizations to build something, maybe in homage to the sources giving it to them. Yeah,
well, when we turn to the literature, the mystery schools, like the Pythagorean mystery school, they had a deep reverence they studied relationships. And not necessarily the relationships between, you and your significant other or friendship, that too, but the relationships between numerical ratios and harmony and music and what they refer to as the planet of the spheres. They're rotating, they're creating the sound we supposedly can't hear, and those harmonies are linked to numbers. There's a whole esoteric number symbolism, which later in time, historically, the Golden Dawn puts together for tarot, and everything is corresponded, where every planet, every tarot card, every color, every number has an attribution. Every number, this is one of the profound things I learned from John Anthony West. Every number is about form, function, or process, and every number has a gender, right? I'll go through really quickly, 1 through 10.
Every number is a gender.
Yeah, every other one is a different gender.
Interesting.
Right? So 1. There can only be one. We're all one. One. There can only be one. It just exists. The one becomes conscious of itself and splits into 2.
Okay.
In Egyptian terms, this is the god Atum, who they say mentally masturbates and creates a version of himself on the primordial mound. In the beginning of time for the Egyptians, it was all watery chaos. It's chaos coming into order. Order returned to chaos. It's an eternal cycle. So there's a mound that arises from the earth, and then you have Atum. So this is Egyptian term. So Atum splits himself. It's expressed in this way. It's the one becomes the two. What is two? Duality and polarity. And this is still metaphysical before we come into existence. So you have duality and polarity, and some will even say in esoteric traditions that two is movement to go. You can use the number mnemonic two, like T-O, for remembering two, because you're going to something.
Yeah.
The one is expanding to something, but you truly don't have that duality until you get to three, which 3 is the number of relationships. 3 is the number of the pyramid. 3 is the observing spectator, right? Then this is still metaphysical. There's always 3. It's the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, the Holy Trinity. 3 is an esoteric number. 3, 6, and 9.
Threes. Absolutely.
It's all in 3. And then material manifestation, us, 4. 4 is a number of stability. It's a number of substance, materiality, form. This is why the ancients would find ancient sacred spaces. They would sometimes look for cosmotelluric zones where you have terrestrial forces. They would converge, the cosmic would converge with terrestrial of the earth would converge with that of the cosmic. What do I mean? Every morning there is, the Earth's magnetic field is affected and it plays out in a way where it can impact, we have what are known as subtle earth energies, right? Allegedly, right? That run through the earth because some stones are conductors. And the scientific term for it is conductivity discontinuity, where they refer to them as ley lines, energy grids, and where they intersect is often where you have, a difference in the landscape. And so when these things come together, these are often sacred spaces, or you, depending on orientation, you're looking at the stars or alignments, or you're orienting a sacred space. You take that sacred space, and I hesitate to use this because really, who gets to determine what is and is not sacred or spiritual? Because everything is, right? But the Egyptians had this concept of things being more sacred, or a space in a sense. This is where the primordial mound would be. And there are many of them, because all the temples have a primordial mound story. Well, not all of them, but many of them. And then they would enclose that sacred space, and that's how they'd build that temple, like a seed. The temple was organic. It was a living stone structure. It would grow from that inner sanctum or the nous, and the temple would grow out from that exponentially, and it would grow over time. So you're consecrating sacred space, and only the initiated priesthood could enter. We're very fortunate today that as tourists, we could just go in and traverse these temples and go into the Holy of Holies. In ancient times, it was only the priest himself or the highest level of initiates or Pharaoh himself and his family that could access the innermost sanctum of a temple. The general populace couldn't enter the temple. On some occasions, they could go to the courtyard, which precedes the temple, to observe the festivals where certain principles were communicated. And this is where you would petition to be a candidate in the mystery schools, and you'd learn the mystery school teachings, and maybe you become a scribe, although often scribes came down through the Father. And there's a whole degree of scribes. You learn when you're young, and you go through, there's different levels of scribes. There's different stages or degrees of priesthood. You have the Wa'eb priesthood, which was responsible for purification rituals. Before you could even enter the temple, you had to be pure. You had to take your ass over to the sacred lake and do the rituals and perform rituals to enter the temple. Then you had to cleanse the temple. As a Wa'eb priest, before you could go through, you would have to perform rites. In the morning, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 5 times a day. You're going to wake the temple up in the morning, and then you're going to rock it back to sleep during the day, and you're going to nourish it throughout the day with offerings. We talked about offerings in the other episode, and rituals, which is what is depicted on all the walls. Most of the walls in temples in Egypt, it's the rituals that the priests would have to perform in the temple, usually making offerings to the deity, that the god that the temple is consecrated to. And then not all the priests could go into the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctum, which was the most powerful power spot. The Luxor temple was known in ancient time. Luxor is the Arabic word, like for fort. Well, that's Karnak. But Luxor, the ancient word is Ipet Resut, which was the southern sanctuary, the secret southern sanctuary. Because in the southern part of the temple is the innermost part of the temple, and that's where the select highest initiated priesthood and pharaoh could go. They almost had their own, it was like their own religion, their own hidden religion. Very similar in Christianity, how the priests can go behind, you have the papal mass, they can go behind the altar where they do their own rites that you don't see, then they come out and they perform for the masses. In Egypt, the general religion was the Osirian religion, Osiris was the principle of cyclical renewal. When the Nile would inundate and flow every year and then recede and go back, that cycle was Osiris. Or another way of expressing the principle of Osiris, you've got a seed. You drop it in the earth. It sprouts a tree. The tree bears fruit. The fruit drops a seed. There's an eternal cycle. That is Osiris in action. And the pharaoh was thought to be Osiris in the afterlife. It was this cyclical, it was the principle of resurrection, renewal, right? And the Nile would renew everything every year. Horus, his son, represents breaking out of the hamster wheel, returning back to the original source. So we're talking about the doctrines almost of like incarnation, resurrection. You know, Jesus was the way to the Father. Horus, it is through Horus you're going to return to the source. So you're going back to where the creator. You're not just going through endless cycles. That's, you know, like karma, and that's reincarnation. People think you're going through several cycles to learn lessons until you figure out how to break out of the hamster wheel and return to the source. And so the Horian religion was more of, you know, within the priesthood. And so, and all offerings would be made. And so the temple was a sacred space. It was built on sacred ground. And so we get a square to symbolize that structure. And that square is all throughout humanity. We use the geometry of it, the shapes, to enclose something. Even our modern buildings today are a square or, you know, a triangle pointing up.
That's right.
It's pointing up. So it's material returning to spirit. When it's pointing down, it's spirit manifesting as matter. The Masonic aprons, which is the Google, pull up the Google logo. Google or Gmail logo.
Gmail logo?
Yeah.
Oh, with the
has the
envelope.
triangle. Yeah, has the envelope, which is the same design that you see Freemasons wearing on their apron.
So you're saying Gmail is Freemasonry?
Pull up a Masonic apron. Oh, there's so much Masonic symbolism. The Masons are a long-running historical esoteric organization. Apron. Put in Masonic apron.
Masonic apron.
And put in Gmail next to it. I'm sure people are drawn to. There you go. There's your Gmail.
Wow. Yeah. So here's the thing I always ask on this though. When you have something a universal shape as simple as a fucking triangle. In this case, it's upside down. It's like so many people could make a symbol, and I'm not saying it's not true. I'm not saying that there's not some sort of underlying, like, sinister whatever. But I'm saying, like, you know, you'll see people claim anytime someone does anything on the internet with any kind of fame where they make any symbol with their hand, they're like, oh, they're in the Illuminati. Because, like, the Illuminati has these very simple, in many cases, like, I'm not going to do them right now because that'll get fucking screenshotted. But you know what I mean? Like, these simple shapes that they'll make that any other fucking person could make and have no idea. I didn't even know, like, what the Illuminati was until I was, like, 21 years old or whatever.
It's a high degree in the Rosicrucian order.
Well, it is?
There's an Illuminati degree for Rosicrucians that have gone through all the degrees. Of course.
Is that associated?
There's the general understanding of the Illuminati on the outside and historical understanding, but esoteric traditions have something also known as traditional history or sacred history, which
wait, they're tied together, though?
Western esotericism is all these Freemasons, Illuminati, OT. They're not the same thing, but they're all like a chain and a link. They're all like a chain. They're all connected.
But your Rosicrucian chain has an Illuminati segment of it.
I don't know. It's not mine. The Rosicrucian order, Amorc, the ancient mystical order, Rosicrucis, there is an Illuminati degree in the monographs. The higher degree Rosicrucians learn about it. You learn about fascinating things, not to give all the secrets away. You learn about radiesthesia, which is like a higher form of dowsing, which came out in the early 20th century. There are esoteric circles in France that were studying the work of a Jesuit priest who was using radiesthesia, like dowsing, to locate missing people, to determine if certain plants were edible. Because, listen, you want to know who has the secrets? It's not the Illuminati. It's not the Freemasons. The Jesuits, those guys were some of the first to go around. Look at who was going to Egypt. Look at who was going to eat. Before we look at Egypt and we're like, oh, Napoleon and all his savants, who were Rosicrucians and Freemasons, by the way. Little known fact, Napoleon was the Grand Master of the Rosicrucian Lodge before.
Who told me that? Yeah. Shit.
I put it in a video years ago in my Ancient Egypt Mystery Schools videos. In fact, we have Napoleon's collar in San Jose, California, at Rosicrucian headquarters,
His
in the
collar?
staff research library. It's like an apron, but a collar, which his signal on it is. You can probably Google search Napoleon's collar.
Napoleon collar.
It's probably one of the photos that I took. Yeah, Napoleon, it was a dual agenda. The typical historical narrative is that he was trying to expand trade routes, went into Egypt, and him and all of his savants. These were astronomers, mathematicians. These were Freemasons and Rosicrucians. The other aspect of this is they were going to look for the roots. Oh, top left. That might even be my photo. That's Napoleon's collar on display in the Rosicrucian staff research slide.
He would wear that?
Yeah. There's a bee. You can't see it, but in the top right, in the white, maybe if you zoom in, you can see it. There's a hidden bee, which was a crest, a symbol. It's hard to see at first. Yeah, zoom in. There you go. More.
It doesn't go farther.
In the white area, there's a bee. It's hidden. Bee was a symbol of transformation and also working the unit. There's a lot of symbolism behind the bee. In fact, the Egyptians incorporated it as a whole, to determine somebody was a king in hieroglyphs. We can see that they have a Nisu Biti title before the cartouche. Nisut Biti, it's the sedge and the bee, which is thought to represent the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, but also represent the dual function of the king, meaning the pharaoh's role as an administrator. Because see, the kings of Egypt, their office was not strictly political. It was dual. It was also spiritual.
Divine.
It was divine.
Yeah.
They were shaman. We don't call the ancient Egyptian pharaohs shaman or shaman, but they were shaman. They were accessing the divine. They would go through initiations and coronations like the Heb-Sed festival to keep their crown, where they would have to go and connect with divine statues that they believed were living stone statues because they had the ka, the ba. Priests would do certain rituals to the statues so that it would... And really, stone is just a lower vibrational frequency, right? The Egyptians viewed stone as living. Their statues were living stone statues. Their view was that of animism, where the whole world, it's completely different from the way we view things today. We just see this dead stone there. For them, in a sense, it was a lower vibrational frequency. And then that's the mineral kingdom. Then you have the plants, which feed on the mineral kingdom. Then you have the animal kingdom, which feeds on the plants. And then you have humanity, which feeds on all of it. We are a part of all. We have minerals in us. We also have the stardust in us. But yeah, so the ancient Egyptians viewed their temples as living stone structures that, like all things in creation, are continual. So that's why the temples would grow out. And they would always be consecrated on sacred space. And so that's why they chose specific shapes. Now, I have a whole other idea when I say this could come from source, is because I'll share a quick personal story.
Please.
When I was in the Yucatan studying and I have videos about this on my YouTube channel, the symbolism of Uxmal. When I was at Uxmal and I noticed the frieze and a lot of the symbolic motifs, they were geometrical designs, brilliant geometrical designs, absolutely mind-blowing by the Maya. But then you start looking at it in some of the key, it looks like the Greek symbolism. Then you wonder, was there a cross-cultural thing? There's a whole thing people are trying to say, because we find images with beards, although there's a good case to be made that indigenous people did have beards. But they're trying to say, somebody from outside civilized them. What I noticed is I was in Northern California. I went to this festival, hippie music festival.
You at a hippie music festival? That would never happen.
No, yeah,
no shot.
Hey, it's been a long journey from the hood in Boston to my Northern California days.
Yeah, you are an interesting background guy.
So when I became a hippie and I was trying to expand my consciousness, trying to get myself up out the hood and educate myself, you
imagine going back to Charlestown and being like, yeah, I'm trying to expand my consciousness. I'd be like, get the fuck out.
I do it all the time. I try to talk to them about this stuff. I'll go back to the hood and be like, guys, listen, there's this whole cosmological, and it's just like a deer in the headlights all over there. What the fuck is he talking about?
They're like, he's no longer heterosexual.
So look, when I was at this festival, there's some guy who's offering a cacao. You know what cacao is? It's like
cocoa?
Yeah, cocoa, where we get the cocoa bean. The Maya cultivate the Mayans. We have the Maya to thank for cacao.
Yeah, someone else told me that.
Yeah.
I don't know the story, but someone else told me
there's
that.
a whole story to it. Another day, another podcast.
Yeah, don't worry about
it. So basically, they would also use cacao. Indigenous ceremonies include vision quests using cacao. They would use cacao to trip out and get access to the...
They must have been having a lot of cacao.
They've made a lot of pyramids, more than Egypt, over 2,000 of them. just in the Yucatan alone has dozens and dozens of pyramids. Anyway, in fact, we can get into this. This is another story. The pyramid I found, the uncharted pyramid, not on any tourist map, that rivals the size of Chichen Itza.
You found a pyramid.
Yeah.
No one knows about it.
Yes and no. No one ever hears about it. People do know it exists now. And so INA, the international, it's the authorities of Mexico, they're aware of it. But it's not, if you look at any tourist map, it's not on any map. You don't really hear about it. There's only 2 or maybe 3 academic publications on it. A university had studied it only once before. That was my, that was actually my honeymoon. My wife and I had got married in the Yucatan at the site of Uxmal by a Maya shaman it was a traditional Maya wedding ceremony. We did it at the pyramids. We were the first couple to do this there ever. And then our honeymoon, it wasn't hanging out on the beach. You think Anyextee is going to sit around on the beach when we've got ancient mysteries to explore? We unfortunately, my wife, we came together through our interest in Hermeticism and alchemy, so she's already into, this stuff, and she's indigenous, so she really understands indigenous traditions. So we decided to spend our honeymoon, a couple of weeks, going around the Yucatan and Mexico, not just going to the tourist sites and showing up and paying a ticket, but trying to explore. Real explorers looking for obscure and often overlooked sites and really examining them in depth. So we were like going into the jungle. Few people do this. People go to the archaeological sites. You'll see stuff on YouTube, but few actually go and do real explorations. And so I knew somebody that owned a plot of land in Egypt. He had several hectares, and there was word that there was a pyramid in the jungle. So we went to go explore it. We went at night originally. I had I never put this out on YouTube. I need to make the YouTube video. This is like
this is
over
crazy.
10 years ago. I had an artist design my wife is Lara Croft. Me is Indiana Jones with the dreads in the background. We had the pyramid. It was called Escape. Indie Anyextee and Karina Croft in the Adventures of the Missing Pyramid, subtitle Attack of the Killer Bees. Because when we went there to this pyramid, we actually got attacked by, she did. She got stung multiple times. I had to bring her to the hospital. It was dark. We had to go through first we had to go through a jungle, just us two, no guide, no nothing. And you're going through the jungle, and then, when we get in the direction where we believe the pyramid is, I start hearing noises. It could be wild boar, it could be jaguar. Who knows? Likely not jaguar because there's a lot of people in the area, but maybe we've been there when jaguars have been in the area and they have to hunt them. They're hunting you usually. And so, we get to this massive pyramid, which really what's significant about it, the top of the pyramid, it has a megalithic lintel. The Maya aren't really known for megaliths. They have some big stone, but this is an unusual thing, and it has some unusual rounded masonry, unlike you see elsewhere, contours and such. And it's still, most of it's buried. If you look at it from one angle, you just think it's a giant mound. You wouldn't even know, but it's a 100% legit pyramid that's not fully excavated. And when we get there, we start climbing up, and then the bees come, and we start running out of there, and she freaks out, and she gets stung like, 20, 30 times. And I actually, one of them die and fall off, or I get it. I take a picture of it. I was going to document all this.
Hun, I'm getting a picture.
So
Suck it up.
Well, no, I took the bee because, they followed us. They're chasing us all the way back. And then I forget how we even ended up getting that bee. I don't know if it was in her clothes or I forget but we had the bee because I wanted to show the doctor to be like, is this a killer bee? This is what stung her. Because we didn't know what was going to happen. She got stung and she got very sick right away. She had like a bad allergic reaction. I'm like rushing out of the jungle. I swear it felt like an Indiana Jones adventure. We find this pyramid. We're attacked by killer bees. We go to the car. I rush her to the hospital in Piste. She goes overnight. They give her an injection. I show the doctor the bee. He didn't know what to say about it or whatever, but she's supposed to be fine. Yeah, and that was the end of that mission until the next morning when we were talking about it, and she said, let's go back. I was like, all right. So we go back now in daylight earlier, second attempt, and I document the whole thing. I'm filming. I filmed us running away from the bees. The camera was rolling the whole time. None of this is staged. You see it all happens in real time. And then I finally get to the peak of the pyramid. She didn't want to climb all the way up the top. I would say, again, the height rivals Chichen Itza. I don't know the exact dimensions of the height. Again, there isn't much published on this pyramid, but I found a lintel with inscriptions. And before I learned how to read the hieroglyphic language, which I'm still learning, the Maya language. The Maya were really my first. I was going to write a book on the Olmec and the Maya years ago. And so I started studying the Maya language, which is very difficult, very hard to read Maya glyphs.
Why is that?
It's incredibly hard to learn, I think. Egypt is like, if you focus on Egyptian hieroglyphs for 3 months, you're going to learn how to read hieroglyphs.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking, because you,
I don't
you were
know.
able to pick that up, but not Maya.
There's so many more symbols and the placements, and like it was just very difficult for me to comprehend. It took me. I got all the books I was reading. I know some of them. I could go and be like, oh, I know this means this and this is that, but Maya, to read the Maya language is far more difficult, in my opinion, than studying hieroglyphs. But anyway, I did notice a sign that looked like the symbol for Ekbalam, and what may be a ruler or a queen. So I took this. Now, you've had Luke. Luke says his mentor is Dr. Ed Barnhardt.
Correct.
Before Luke even met Dr. Ed Barnhardt, years ago, I had contacted Dr. Ed Barnhardt. I mean, this is...
Yeah, he's like the guy.
I know from studying Maya, he's a serious Mayanist. He has some alternative ideas of his own, which are reasonable to conjecture. He's been featured on Ancient Aliens, but he's never said anything wild. And now he's in Graham's series. He's a serious source. He studied under Linda Sheely. So this is important in the Maya world. She was an art historian who helped decoding. She's part of the whole movement that forwarded everything in Mayan studies. And so I contacted him. I had been following for years. I knew who all the players were, the academics, who's writing papers, because I was reading everything. I know he was around. He was selling the Maya calendar. He had a website. He did podcasts. So I reached out to him. I knew he knew the language. And he confirmed that these hieroglyphs may be relating to the Queen of Ekbalam, which is a site north of Chichen Itza. And Peace Day, where this pyramid is. So there's a connection. And there may be more to it. This isn't fully worked out. I think there's only one university, Penn State University, if I recall, and there's only been 1 or 2 publications on this site. I didn't know that at the time. And I came back, I'm like, fuck, I discovered a pyramid. This is, it was over a decade ago. I was a little more naive. I discovered a real pyramid. You're not discovering anything new. The authorities know about everything. They've scanned, they know, the locals know where everything is already, and then the authorities know where stuff is. It's difficult to find something new, and maybe little things here and there are buried, yes, but for the most part, they know far more than we know. And so I found out that you don't see it on any map, but I did find, when I dug into it, it did exist. And I posted it on Facebook, and another fellow researcher, hundreds of people like the post. Nobody had ever seen the site. It's just one guy that studies the Maya really well, and he was like, oh, it's Ikil. And I was like, Ikil?
Oh, he knew it.
He knew it. And he was like, yeah, I'm surprised. How would, he was surprised I even went there. And then that's when from there went in and I realized there was a couple of things that were published on it, but few know about this pyramid.
Yeah, the ones I wonder about farther south are the uncharted ones in the Amazon. My buddy Paul Rosalie's been on the podcast 3 times before. He's obviously lived down there for 19 years. And there's urban legend, but also secondhand tales that seem to have legs to them about there being pyramids deep in the Amazon that are protected by the uncontacted tribes that, could have all kinds of implications there. They also might not. They might also just literally be pyramids that these uncontacted tribes are around.
They might not even be pyramids, but they could be terraces or structures too. Sometimes we see a terrace structure and we're like, pyramid. So it's really, how do we define what a pyramid is? Is pyramid really pyramidal? It comes from the Greek word pyramidos, which means fire in the middle. But I've seen images from the Amazon of stone structures, stuff that's out there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's more that we don't know. I think there is. For sure, I'm in league with the idea that there might be more that we can find there.
Yeah, Paul talking about this is what gives some credence to it to me, because Paul is like the ultimate skeptic. He thinks all these fucking people talking anything, any conversations like this, he's like, yeah, okay.
My type of guy.
Yeah, he's just like, all right, dude, relax, back it up. So when he's, and he's still ambiguous about it, I don't know. But,
Good attitude.
But it's interesting because the Amazon is so dense, man, and the history there from just like a Mother Nature perspective is insane. But real quick, I just gotta run to the bathroom. When we come back, we gotta talk about this emerald tablet I've been looking at all day, and the Luxor Temple as well. We keep putting that off, so let's get to that. All right, we're back. You were just saying off camera that 15, 20 minutes ago you got off the one story about the cacao. What was going on there?
Yeah.
So let's just fill that in real quick.
Yeah. I seem to go on a tangent. Sorry about that.
All right. No, it was good.
I was telling a story about the time I went to the festival in Northern California, and So as I mentioned, I'd been to Mexico. I would lead tours of Mexico. I've done explorations there, and I could see all these geometric reliefs. When I was at this festival, I stopped at this vendor booth to get cacao, which it comes from the coca bean, and it's like I thought it was gonna be a cacao milkshake. You know, I thought it was just like I thought I was taking some nutritional drink and everything. Safe with these hippie guys who have a higher consciousness.
Safe with these hippie guys. Bad start.
Well, you know, in truth, it was, you know, I know a lot of people in Northern California, and they do tend to have a higher level of consciousness when it comes to health. You know, so I was just trusting the fact that everything's organic and fresh, and it was. It's just that I don't know how he prepared his cacao, but he did it likely in the traditional way, because there are indigenous traditions that use cacao for vision quests. You know, a lot of people know the ayahuasca or San Pedro, Wachuma, you know, what have you. But cacao can induce mild. You can receive visions from cacao. Apparently, as I have experienced.
Yeah. So what happened?
So I'm drinking this shake, and you know, I thought everything was fine. I thought, you know, and I'm walking around, and literally within minutes, I look up to the sky, and I'm like, oh man, I don't feel good. I feel like I want to pass out, and I start dripping with beads of sweat. And I'm looking at the sky, and I usually don't. I'm not the type of person to get visions like this. But I had these visions, and it started to look like gears turning and like geometrical shapes. And they were very similar to the geometrical shapes that, you know, I see among the Maya and elsewhere at the Greek. And I'm like, and then I got really sick, and I ended up vomiting and passing out for a while, and woke up, you know, yeah.
There you go.
Hippie festival. So then it dawned on me after the fact. I was like, fuck, man, I was really sick. I was like, but man, I must have been tripping, because the sky just started turning into these geometrical shapes, which remind me of the stuff I've seen in ancient civilizations. And I'm wondering if this is the missing key to why a lot of this, you know, a lot of these principles, thoughts, ideas, symbolic gestures make their way into different cultures around the world, oceans apart. You know, were they all tripping off drugs? Or you know, the thing is, I hesitate to say tripping off drugs, because
I understand.
they're supposed to be medicine, right? Yeah. It's plant medicine is a sacred act. And it's supposed to get you, for shaman, they're getting in touch with the divine. They're going within, and they're accessing the immaterial world around us, right? Or above, or whatever. And so I'm wondering if a lot of these geometric shapes come from certain experiences, perhaps, which then they're expressing, because why do we see it with the Maya? Why do we see it with the Greek? Why do we see it elsewhere? And they're basic, you know, geometrical patterns, your squares, your triangles, and then the different, you know, forms that can come out of that. But at the end of the day, forms, as they align with numbers, again, these are universal principles. They're at the core of everything. We're still using the square to enclose a space. We still, even though you can have different interpretations for a triangle, it's pointing up, it's denoting up, and when it's inverted, it's pointing down. It has a meaning. Yeah, there's multiple meanings of that symbolism. In alchemy, it means something different, you know, but ultimately at the core, it's usually the same thing. Material pointing up to the spiritual, and spiritual coming back down into the material, that eternal cycle. And so, yeah, I just started to wonder if, you know, because it was through indigenous traditions and Western esoteric philosophy and ontology that sometimes it differs from our more scientific, deductive, rationalized Western view of things, if they were receiving the information from the divine, if they were receiving information from Creator, perhaps with the help of plant helpers. You know, because it's the shaman.
I see.
It's the shaman who goes out and eats the mushroom for the first time, trips out, has visions, and comes back and communicates to the tribe to raise the vibration of the tribe, to help the people out. You know what I mean? And so that's, I'm wondering if these visions, you know, these ideas are coming to them.
Yeah.
Or the other, and I'm not sold on any one idea. The other concept is also like what I was saying before. As humans, we all face the same problems. We're likely going to arrive at the same conclusions. I do this all the time. I think I was the first one to find a parent. I think I invented this idea, or I think I was the first to do this. Then you go on the internet, you're like, oh, I'm going to put out this video on this rare oh, fuck, this guy already did it 3 years ago. You know, like we arrive at the same conclusions.
Yeah. It's amazing that in today's world of over 8 billion people with human history, how even if you said it was shorter than people like to think it is, however long it is, which is a long time, and all the internet connecting us with all these ideas, from the way someone phrases a tweet all the way to research that's existed for thousands of years. Like the idea, no pun intended, that we can continue coming up with new, fresh, and original ideas, to me is something I think about so often, because I'm like, wow, it really is exponential, because you think everything's been done, or most things have been done. Like you still, to your point, you still will think of stuff and you'll be like, oh my God, that's crazy. And then you'll type in what you just thought on Google and it's like, 100 results. And you're right. That does still happen. But like on the other side of it, I'll think of something and I'll be like, that's definitely been done before. And I'll just something random, not anything like a note, but like I'll type it into Google. I'm like, ooh, that's never been said before. Wow. Like it's a crazy thing about shared information today.
Well, that's it. We're all going to be faced with the same challenges and problems, arrive at similar conclusions. And that could be the reason why, you see step pyramids in Egypt and Mexico.
Right.
We know that there are tombs in Mexico for certain. There's no debate on that. Like
we
the tomb
know
of
that?
you got the tomb of Pakal. They have found bodies inside. Whole different story. We have Pakal. Pakal was found, interestingly enough, with jade in his hand, one square cube and one circle. Geometrical shapes, square and circle, squaring the circle. These are Masonic concepts too, by the way. I don't know if you find it, but yeah, so we know when the pyramids are built. Like, I think Billy Carson has stated the pyramids, the Maya and Meso-Americans didn't build the pyramids. They were thousands of years before the aliens and Thoth built them. Not true. We know the pyramids were built by the Maya because of the debris found inside the core structure of the pyramids. When they looking at the ruins of the pyramids, they could find debris that they could you can't radiocarbon date stone, but you can radiocarbon date the organic material inside stone. And we can look at the pottery and be like, oh, we know this is the pottery from a certain period. We know this trash dates back to a certain period. And it all aligns with the preponderance of evidence that would suggest that they did build the pyramids. And then when you look at the big picture, you're like, well, Maya was doing it, and they're using the shape. It's roughly like a triangular shape, trying to reach the heavens or the above. You want to have some dominant, shape to connect. See, when it comes to pyramids as tombs, I think there's something more. It's possible the bodies weren't in there the entire time. That's why we don't find bodies. It's also possible that they were looted. It's also possible that our understanding of a tomb is getting in the way of the ancient Egyptians' understanding of their function for the pyramids. Those stone sarcophaguses or stone boxes may have just been used symbolically or energetically in a way that we don't fully comprehend today to hermetically seal the energy inside. When they found that stone box inside the pyramid, one of the pyramids at Saqqara, not the Djoser pyramid, one next to it, it was still sealed. It had gypsum on it. And when they opened it up, nothing was inside. So if it was looted and they took the body, why would the looters go through the trouble of sealing it back up? So it's quite possible. And why would it be sealed in the first place? To contain the energy that's in there. And they may have been, we're not viewing things in the way like this energy is sacred right here. But for the ancient Egyptians, it was. This is a sacred space. They may have done incantations and rituals, to that box and put things in, take things out, and then sealed it. This is a special sacred thing that we need to function for the afterlife. That is part of the afterlife process. Because you find the same thing in the deeply mysterious Serapeum, which is for a long time, is also Saqqara, which for a long time, alternative historians have tried to make a case for it being the product of a lost civilization.
Can you explain what this is to people?
Yeah, so the Serapeum or Serapeum, depending on which pronunciation you want to go with, is an underground structure at Saqqara that has some passages and some niches, we'll say niches, and in these cavities or niches, enclosures, are boxes. Many of them granite, different types of stone. Most of them are granite, really big boxes. So people make a big deal about this stone. We would say sarcophagi. Some people say, well, I don't want to call them sarcophaguses because we don't know for certain somebody was buried in them. But they're massive. They're bigger than what a human would fit in. They're big. And the polishing techniques are somewhat mysterious because we don't have the techniques of the polishing. And people would make a case for how they moved those big boxes in the first place. How would they have fit? Because in some of the enclosures or I don't want to say niche because it's more than a niche, but the chamber that it's in, there's not a lot of room on the sides for somebody to work and fashion the stone, right? So how did they do it? Well, it can be explained. It's reasonable conjecture. You can check out, when you want to really research and look at both sides unbiasedly, there's alternatives to the alternatives. And there's channels like Science Against Myth or Sacred Geometry Decoded that have made excellent presentations of how they could have actually done it. And people will be like, well, we don't know. We do know, actually. It's just people don't look into the archaeological record. Some fellow researchers of mine, and I have to shout out the Ancient Presence YouTube channel, they actually went and got the French archaeological report from Marriott, who was one of the early Egyptologists that explored the Serapeum. He went there because earlier in history, Strabo, a geographer and historian, he wrote about an avenue of the Sphinxes that's at Saqqara that led into the Serapeum. Okay, and so later Marriott goes there to look for it. The Sphinxes are missing. And we don't know where they are. They're probably still there underground today. Some ground penetrating radar or some testing, or somebody looted them years ago and they're gone. In any event, he stumbles upon the Serapeum, falls into it. But when he goes into it, it appears like it had already been looted before he got there. He finds these giant stone boxes. And then he also finds on the ground we talked about how moving stone, they would use rollers. He found wooden rollers, and it could all be achieved. It's possible that they could have moved the stones. There's no debate about that. In fact, he even demonstrates how he lowered the stone into the chamber using sand hydraulics, where they would, remove pieces of wood with the sand, and it would allow the thing to sink down into place. And that's how he tested it for himself. So moving the stone is no mystery. People will say, oh, well, these are, much older. They're the product of a lost civilization. Well, everything you see today pretty much as a tourist inside the Serapeum is not all that the Serapeum or Serapeum offers. The oldest extent that we know of traces back to the New Kingdom. It was the work of Amenhotep III, who also built the Luxor Temple, we'll talk about in a minute, or commissioned it. Amenhotep was first doing it with wooden boxes, and they were used for the Apis bull. So these weren't human burials, they were Apis or Apis bull burials. What is Apis? It has to do with, the Serapeum is the idea for the Serapeum. Okay, so there's one part of Serapeum that's underground. This is the old New Kingdom part, started by Amenhotep III. They're using wooden boxes. They actually did find the remains, memorial remains, some pieces of cow remains in them. And then, but that is so dilapidated and destroyed, they close it off so people don't get hurt today. It's not really well restored. They only let you see the rest of the Serapeum, which is much later. It's the end of the New Kingdom, and then the Persians dig out a tunnel, Darius digs a tunnel, and then the Greek Ptolemies come in, and they expand more of it, and most of the boxes you see are Persians and late Greek. So people try to say this is all pre-dynastic. No, it's actually very late in Egyptian history. And how do we know? Because if you dig into the archaeological record and you read Marriott's report, we can see how they moved the stone, but also at the Louvre exists these stela, little stone tablets that they took out of the Serapeum that Marriott removed. When you're in the Serapeum, and I've heard other guides explain this to their groups as there's like these little niches. It looks like a U shape, right? Like a niche, a bunch of them on the wall. And I've heard other guides say, oh, that's where they would have put their lights. They would have put light fixtures in there. That's because even those guides aren't reading the Egyptological context. Guides will go to a guide school. They study Egyptology for 2 years. They learn how to read hieroglyphs, and they learn the basics. And then they go out and you're a guide. It's the more advanced. So you can't, this Egyptian guide said it. Right. Yeah, they're an Egyptologist in a sense, but they're not a PhD degree. They haven't dug deeper. And so when you look into the record and you realize that Marriott actually moved the stelas that had fallen on the ground at the time to the Louvre, and in the Louvre, we have the accounts from the Ptolemaic Greeks themselves talking about how long it took to move the stone, how long it took to fashion and carve out the Serapeum. And for many years, alternatives have said this is probably the product of a lost civilization. It's not. We literally have the ancient Egyptians, very late Greek Ptolemaic, ancient Egyptians themselves telling us how long it took to fashion the entrance, to move the box in, and how many people it took, and all the accounts are all there. And not only that, we know who every single mysterious box is attributed to. People make a big deal because they're big, and they say, they're like 70 tons with a lid, another 30 tons, these mysterious 100-ton boxes. They're not. I've had engineers take a look at it. They're likely probably more in the realm of 40 tons. The lid is maybe another 30, so you could say 70 in totality, roughly speaking. And so, when we look at this, we have a lot of the pieces already. We already know from the Egyptological record what's going on. It's not old. It's actually very late in Egyptian history. And we even know that they were assigned to certain kings. Each chamber that holds a box was assigned to a king, not for the king to go in, but the king's Apis bull. The bull, the cow, they were venerated in ancient Egypt, even in pre-dynastic times. The big one in Egypt, the big god, was Hathor, from where we get the word Horus, which Horus's name is Het-Heru, which means house of Hathor. Or I'm sorry, Hathor means house of Horus. Het-Hur. Het-Hur is house, Hur is Horus, house of Horus, Het-Hur, which then becomes Hathor in English, and then her son Horus. She was the womb of Horus. Why was she the womb? She was the mother. She was the cosmic principle of nourishment. They believe that the Milky Way, look, Hathor was the one that basically nourished. She was often likened also to Aphrodite by the Greeks. So she, love and magic. And what you got to realize is she was a sacred divine feminine principle. There's different aspects of that. You have Isis or Iset, which represents the magic and the love. You have Sekhmet, which is the warrior and protector, the fierce lioness. It's the untamed female. Then you have the tamed cow, the nourishing cow, because the cow gives milk and it's about nourishment and fertility. You have Bastet, the cat. They're all aspects of one sacred divine feminine principle. Hathor represents like nourishment in a sense. And so cows, bulls were venerated in ancient Egypt, so much so that the priesthood would look for a specific cow. They call it the Serapeum, which is a Greek name after Serapis, which is a syncretized version of the ancient Egyptian god Osiris. And then also they add Ptah into it, and their god Serapis, which they put together, which comes from the Apis, the Apis bull. Okay, so this happens. This isn't uncommon. When the Ptolemaic Greeks come in, they syncretize some of the old Egyptian gods with their previous Greek gods to form new concepts to explain these cosmic or natural principles. And so what these boxes are effectively are Apis bull burials. But in the new part of the Serapeum, many of the lids were left on, even though they're looted. They never found a body of a bull inside. But we did find remains in the old Serapeum. There's a little-known Isopeum right next to the Serapeum that nobody talks about. It was consecrated to Isis. But we do have some remains from bulls. There's a lot of controversy around this. Long story short, it's not the product of a lost civilization. The stones we know can be moved. We have the Egyptians themselves telling us how long it took to move them, how long it took to fashion everything. And then you have on these tablets that were originally, you can go to the Louvre and look some of them up online even, and you can see, the accounts. And so they were attributed to different pharaohs because each pharaoh was assigned an Apis bull. And the priests would have to go and get a very specific bull. This is what I mean by their understanding differs from ours today. They would have to look for a bull with guess what? A geometric figure, a triangle.
Down.
It has to have a white triangle on its head. Otherwise, it's not down. And so what it represents is the god Ptah, who was the architect of the universe. He was the god of the architects and the masons, the breath of life across the waters. He was the animating principle, Ptah, the fire principle, the initiating principle. And so Ptah would incarnate or manifest in the physical form of a bull if he had that symbol. If the bull had that symbol, it was considered the living manifestation of Ptah. And they would venerate this creature. And eventually they would sacrifice it and make an offering. And it wasn't like a brutal, bloody bloodbath. It was actually, they would take their time. Even today, with some of the ceremonies in the Middle East, like you see, they whisper like prayers into its ears, and they fold the ears over the eyes, and they give it a peaceful death. Basically, it's a ritual killing. And it's not to murder, destroy something. It's a way of one, nourishment for us, and then a way of bloodletting in a sense to give back to the gods. I am giving this bull to you, God Amun or Ptah as an offering. And so the Apis bull specific, and they would fatten these cows, and they would be part of their processions, like the Yopet festival. They would bring all the cows into the Luxor temple to be slaughtered as an offering to Amun. But this cow was a divine. The ones that would have this mark would be a divine creature, and every king had an Apis bull, that was buried. So but then you realize when you're going, there was a transition where they used to do it in wooden sarcophagus to stone. And one pharaoh is basically like, we know it's attributed to this pharaoh because right when you walk in the Serapeum to the left, there's there's a lid with hieroglyphs on it, and explains how the pharaoh is ordering, the finest stone for the first time, the best of the best. And then that tradition continues on with Darius, the Persians, and then the Greeks after them. And then it stops. And then there's a mystery because there's one of these big stones in the middle of the Serapeum. Everybody says, why is it in the middle? It's likely it was left behind because it was at the end of because we have it all the way up to Cleopatra. We believe that the last box belonged to Cleopatra, maybe her father. But every one of them is identified with a specific pharaoh. So we know far more than a lot of alternative researchers who cherry pick certain information are actually conveying. The Serapeum is not as old as people think it is. The Serapeum was for Apis bull burials, but there may be more to that process. Maybe they were just put the bull in there for a specific period of time, or even slaughtered the bull in there, and that act was considered sacred. Then took the bull out and put the stone lid on top of it, and that was a sacred act took place here, and we're trying to hermetically seal that energy. Because maybe for them, I'm just throwing stuff out here. Yeah. Maybe for them, that energy helped facilitate the afterlife. I do believe that it's very likely that the ancient Egyptians viewed the pyramids in a sense as a tool to help facilitate with the afterlife process. Now, whether the king stayed in it, entombed in it, I can't say. Same thing, with the Apis bull burials. It could just be to contain some sort of energy. But I do think that bodies were likely interred in these because there's so many.
Right. So that could be at least one thing from it, or the only soul thing.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That was really good. I was mesmerized by a lot of that. But I keep looking at this all day, and we keep putting it off. We got the Emerald Tablet. I showed it in the first episode. It's very cool. Like, you guys can't really see on camera right here, but it's like when you put it under the light, it's translucent. So what am I looking at here?
What you're looking at, Julian, is a replica of the Emerald Tablet. You're looking at the Emerald Tablet. Well, not exactly the Emerald Tablet, because there is no Emerald Tablet. We don't even know if a physical Emerald Tablet ever existed in the first place. So what is this? This is, one, it's written in Phoenician dialect, which reads from right to left. And the reason for that is because around the time that we think the Emerald Tablet was conceived, this is what the way stonecutters would have likely been using it in that region around the Mediterranean, probably would have been Phoenician dialect if it had existed. And based on several accounts that we have of the Emerald Tablet, how the glass looked melted and stuff, this was crafted. This was commissioned by an artist. It was sanctioned by the International Alchemy Guild, and originally, it was an operative alchemist, one of the few people that is still performing actual alchemy or has and studied alchemy in Prague, and author Dennis Hauck. If you want to learn about the Emerald Tablets, you can go to the academic sources, or if you want to get a more easier to understand version, you don't want to dig through all the text, you don't go to Billy Carson. You go to Dennis Hauck. Right. You come to Anyextee.
We had started to talk about this in the first episode and got off it. So that's a good refresher here. But what were Carson's? Carson said there's multiple tablets. Number one, right? And what are the other issues with his claims?
Okay, so let's distinguish. And I was the first person on YouTube to make this distinction and call out. I didn't actually call out his name, but I had talked to him at the time. And if you go back, there's a lot of researchers on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok now. They're all saying the same thing, that it came from my original research. I was the first one to publish a video on this almost half a decade ago on the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean Priest King versus the Emerald Tablet. I wanted to make a clear distinction because I was one of the first people taking photos of the Emerald Tablet online. If you go back and you Google search Emerald Tablet, years ago, I was the only game in town. All the images of the Emerald Tablet was me. It's my hand holding the tablet in my backyard. And you would see those images in blog articles, thumbnails on YouTube. None of these people have ever reached out and asked me if they could use it. And I don't mind because I don't really care much about ownership mentality. I never got the credit, but I was one of the first ones putting that image out there. But what I noticed is a lot of them were referring to the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, when they're using my image. And I'm like, I had already known because I had done the research, as I was confused in the beginning. I had an interest in alchemy and the Hermetic tradition. And so I became in Rosicrucianism, which is an heir to the alchemical tradition. And so I started studying, in fact, at the Rosicrucian Museum, there's an entire alchemy exhibit that goes through the whole alchemical process, all the stages. They've got all these artifacts in there. And they have the Emerald Tablet replica on display because the Emerald Tablet is a fascinating and deeply mysterious piece of philosophical, history. It is the basis of the Western esoteric tradition.
Why do we say that?
We say it because it's at the basis of the Hermetic tradition, which gives way to the alchemical tradition and then alchemy, and percolates all the way through the mystery schools to all the way down into the Renaissance, when they start bringing these ideas back out, esoteric ideas, right on down to the turn of the century, when you have like the Golden Dawn and esoteric organizations, into modern day Rosicrucian and Freemasonry. It's come down a long line. Many of the alchemists in the medieval ages referenced the Emerald Tablet. In fact, they had copies of the text. They would hang copies of the text. They would all have the Emerald Tablet. It's so important because it serves as the basis for alchemy and the Hermetic tradition, which basically is the big part of the root of Western esoteric, traditions. And why is it the basis? Because it's not even so much the tablet itself. It's what's on it. It's what it says. In fact, you could probably pull up a translation. There's been many translations. Many scholars throughout antiquity have translated the Emerald Tablet. And so this is good. Dennis William Houck is a good translation. This is more current. I've done one too. I can't transliterate because I don't know how to read Phoenician, but through interpreting the principles, I've done my own translation, but this one is very good, right? It talks about in truth without deceit. So saying this is true. There's several rubrics on here, and each one of them is part of the alchemical stages of alchemy. And that parallels, in a sense, stages of cosmology. I keep using the word cosmology. Some people might not know what that is. Cosmology, study of the universe. It's a story of coming into creation. It's the 1 becomes the 2, into the 3, to the 4, to the 5, to all the way up to the 10, and return to source, right? So how we come into creation. And so the story of the Emerald Tablet, the original Emerald Tablet, there's an Emerald Tablet of Hermetic tradition. You had asked me what the deal is with Billy Carson. Billy Carson wrote a book, The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, or I don't know if that's the exact title, but it's about the Emerald Tablet, a compendium to the Emerald Tablets, where Billy Carson claims to have deciphered the ancient texts and writes about them in his book. Well, I've looked at the book. Aside from all the grammatical errors and what appears to be a bunch of cut and paste blog articles, which don't provide any support to his overall thesis. A lot of interesting information. So you read it, and it's like a yes ladder in politics. A yes ladder is when a politician's running, and they're like, "Are you tired of paying taxes?
Yeah.
Are you tired of not listening to the Julian Dorey podcast? Well, vote.
Them agree.
Vote for me." And it's a yes ladder. Well, alternative historians will do the same thing. They'll plant seeds of truth. They'll sprinkle in universal truths, and then it'll be easier to accept an idea after you've gone, yes, this sounds fascinating. Yes, this is what I believe. Yes, this resonates with me. And so there's a lot of information in his book that doesn't actually support the actual thesis. The problems I have, the issues that I take with his work is that it was 2018. I think the book was just published, and he was on a radio show, Jimmy Church radio show, and he said, Sir Isaac Newton translated the Emerald Tablets.
This is where we were in the last episode that we got off. So let's go.
Tablets, plural. And I drew that distinction early on because a lot of people didn't know the difference. Emerald Tablet, Emerald Tablets, what's the Emerald Tablets of Thoth? What is all of this? So let's set the record straight today, okay? The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean is a book that came out in the early 20th century. It was written around 1926. It might have got republished a little later. He had to change it. It was by an author named Maurice Doreal, or in some instances, he refers to himself as Dr. Doreal. Although he's not a doctor, he never even got a PhD, barely graduated high school. He said he was a child prodigy, but that's not what his grades reflected. He also said he had been to Egypt, and where the priests in the pyramid, he connected with them about the Emerald Tablet, where they're hiding the Emerald Tablet. But it comes out later, and I had done some extensive research on this. It turns out he'd never been to Egypt. He has no stamps in his passport. His wife or significant other at the time ended up exposing him later and being like, this guy's never been to Egypt.
Don't you hate that?
Oh, yeah.
God, they go bad, don't they?
We know that Doreal, and more than that, something I can bring to the table, this hasn't really been covered anywhere else. You're going to hear this for the first time on the Julian Dorey podcast.
Another exclusive, baby.
I found in the archives at the Rosicrucian headquarters in San Jose, there's something that was known as the journals. This was for the Rosicrucians will publish a publication known as the Digest, and you don't have to be a member of the order to get the Digest. They're for free. The Rosicrucians make so much literature free online that most of the secrets are out. You just got to look for them. But they had a journal. So this was for members, actual initiated members who are, Rosicrucians. And this journal it's proprietary. It stays within the organization. I'm letting the secrets out. But in the interest of fairness, shout out to my friends at the Rosicrucians, they have now made this available in their library, which is now open to the public, so anyone can gain access to this today. And in those journals, we can look back, and there's actually accounts from Harvey Spencer Lewis, the first imperator, writing commentaries about Dorey, the author of the Emerald Tablets, about how there's been a lot of claims, how there's a guy that's moved to Colorado, and how he is a former Rosicrucian, and how he was high up in the Rosicrucian order, and he's starting his own mystery school. And they refuted everything. Basically, Dorey probably became a Rosicrucian in the beginning, stole a lot of the secrets, ran off to Colorado, maybe to appeal to a bunch of soccer moms, I don't know, like Gaia. And so, more credulous audience. And so, who just want to,
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, so basically, he first tells everybody that they got to come to his compound, his mystery school, because the world's going to end, and they'll only be safe with him. And he wrote a bunch of different things, and that time came and passed, nothing happened. He was trying to compete. Dorey was trying to compete with the Rosicrucians, who were a big initiatic esoteric order at that time. He was trying to make his own version of the Rosicrucians. And there's a concept in esoteric traditions known as the Great White Brotherhood. It's much deeper and philosophical. It's like Atlantis.
Sounds a little.
It does. It's terrible because people will think
one.
It's like the Ku Klux Klan. That's not what's going on here. Although in some cases, to be fair, there were certainly racist ideologies in Western esoteric traditions.
You don't say. I would have never guessed.
Yeah. Well,
no way.
People were racist at that time.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So and still are, and in fact, many of us are today. Racism is such an interesting thing because who really gets to define and draw the line? Like we all come up in a social construct. I don't consider myself racist. I grew up in a multicultural neighborhood, but I would also say that there's aspects of me because of conditioning and through society that I may be viewing the world based on some of these old ideologies. We get conditioned. And so racism can be very subtle. So you might not, like somebody of another color intentionally, but, there could be things that you do that could be likened to it. Anyway,
I see what you're
whole
saying.
other subject.
Yeah.
So there were these racist ideologies and concepts in esotericism, but it isn't about that. The white light, it's the light and the dark. It's
Yes.
not about race. So although there's been a lot of instances in the Western esoteric space where people tried to say, there's a Aryan or, white progenitors, bearded white men who traveled the earth, and they're the ones who taught everybody about pyramids and seeded the culture. And anyway, so Dorey, Harvey Spencer Lewis, Imperator of the Rosicrucians, writes about Dorey basically being a charlatan. Literally calls him out for the order and is like, and then Dorey finds out about it, writes to the Rosicrucians, oh no, that's not me, it's not me, it was him. And then Harvey Spencer Lewis addresses that. We've known all along that he's defected from an esoteric tradition, tried to create his own tradition, and borrowed the concepts of Western principles in Western esoteric societies and put that into his book, what he calls the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean Priest King. There are no tablets. It's a book from the 1920s into the 1930s that a man who was trying to create a mystery school and make money off of this created a book called The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean Priest King. And he ties it to Thoth because Thoth is heralded in esoteric tradition because he was the principle of cosmic wisdom. He was Jehuti. He was the god of the scribes, the intelligent one. And so, Dorey would be familiar with the works of Mladen Blavatsky and many others. In fact, there's cases where it looks like he kind of plagiarized some of these works, maybe changed a word or two around a little bit. But for the most part, he's basically lifting knowledge that already exists, principles, putting them into his book, calls the book The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, claims that it came from the priests in Egypt, that they were hiding, those tablets in the pyramid, and none of that.
Fast and loose with the truth.
Fast and loose with the truth. And then he gets called out by the wife, and then the story changes. He channeled it. And then, now they're channeled. Some people will argue, hey, I've read the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. I did too. I read them very early on before I even knew about Dr. Maurice Dorey, whose real name is actually Claude Dawkins.
Oh.
So his name isn't his name. He's not a doctor. He doesn't have the education he
Dorey
claims.
sounds better.
He hasn't. Yeah, well, that's a pen name he wants to go by. We'll respect that. I'm Anyextee. I would appreciate if you refer to me as Anyextee. So, and it's not uncommon in the esoteric tradition to have a pen name,
Right.
We talked about that earlier. Aristotle, a lot of these guys. Anyway, a lot of these apocryphal works are groups of people writing under one school of thought. So I'm not mad at that, the name thing, but there is, the idea that he plagiarized a lot of stuff, took ideas, put them in his book, and then he's claiming that he went to Egypt. He never did. He had and there's a whole story to it. Long story short, Billy Carson, who's interested in ancient aliens and sees himself being on the TV show one day, is online, starts his Forbidden Knowledge Instagram page, which I've been following very early since the beginning. Like I said, back in 2014, 15, Billy started coming into our Adept Initiates group on Facebook when it was active. It's kind of defunct now. And so he started seeing a lot of these esoteric ideas and probably came across this stuff. And there were sites like crystallinks.com, which he cites as a source. Crystallinks.com was a site that took a bunch of the work of alternative historians and put it, online. So if you want to learn about anything, it's all there. But a lot of it is not good scholarship. It's just what alternative opinions, basically. And that's where you find information about, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth and stuff. So I think that Billy had likely found information online, didn't do real research, didn't do academic research. I'm willing to bet Carson probably doesn't even know who Homeyard is or who Ruska is. And these are the scholars, the academic scholars. I've never heard him reference these people. And these are the guys that worked on the Emerald Tablet. And so, what he does in his book, it's supposed to be a compendium of the Emerald Tablets, and he claims that Thoth is an alien entity, and that the Emerald Tablets have this stupendous history that goes back 30,000 years, 35,000 BC, and that Thoth built the pyramids and designed the tablets and hid the tablet in the pyramid and then spread other tablets out, and it's all based on Dorey's book. He took the information, which is a sham itself. Yeah. It's not a verifiable source. Not once have I heard Billy Carson actually cite anything from the academic sources, the actual scholars who worked with the original. Well, one, he can't on the Emerald Tablets because there is none. There's no study around the Emerald Tablets of Thoth because it's the figment of the imagination of Dorey. In the interest of fairness, people will read the book and be like, but I read some powerful stuff. I learned a lot from those, as I did, because it has universal principles in there. Dorey took the information from esoteric organizations and put it in his book. So there's good information in there, but the narrative itself is not actually verifiable at all. It didn't exist. I would challenge any viewer right now to go out and find a single written account anywhere in the world that mentions the Emerald Tablets, plural, before 1928. You won't. Because on this planet, there isn't a single reference to Emerald Tablets because it was created by one guy. So that brings us to the actual historical Emerald Tablet of Hermetic tradition, right? Which is supposed to be a replica of, which is, this is purely speculative. We can't even say it looked like this. It could have been much smaller if it had even existed. We don't even know if we don't even know if the Hermetic tablet existed.
Yeah, and what would this be based off of then?
This is based off of the texts. So what we do have for evidence of the historical Emerald Tablet of Hermetic tradition is a series of texts. Many of them come out in the medieval times. In Europe, they start getting accounts about the Emerald Tablet from the Arabs in Egypt and so forth, because they were already writing about this stuff, right? Books like the Kitab, the Book of Belinus the Wise. There were a number of writings that came out. A lot of it is rooted in a single book. And the academic authority on this, the academic scholar who first researched this, Homeyard, early, maybe 1921 to 28 somewhere, early 20th century, he found in the, Kitab, Belinus, Hakim. Anyway, it's the Arabic name. Basically, the book was entitled The Book of Belinus the Wise. It gets multiple translations. They make its way into Europe. You have Seville and Philippa. Anyway, you get different scholars going to Spain, and eventually it finds its way all throughout Europe. Different translations of the Emerald Tablet, and the story goes back to this Arabic text. It becomes a book for kings. It is a book. It later becomes rebranded as the Secret Secretorium, or the Book of Secrets, which was part of a book. It's a piece, an appendix, effectively, in a book for advice to kings. And so it's legit. The kings were reading about the Emerald Tablet because of the principles inside in the back of this book. But then along came another researcher in the early 20th century, Ruska. I'm probably slightly mispronouncing his name, Ruska. And what he found is the earliest written account of the Emerald Tablet.
Where was that?
He found it as a recension in another one of these books. He found it in a library. It was like water damage. Nobody was paying attention to these books. And it was like, again, an addition, an appendix, a recension to a book in the back of the book. And the account comes from Sergius of Nablus, which is in Palestine. When I was just in Jordan, I could see it over the water where Nablus was. Sergius of Nablus was like a 5th, 6th century thaumaturgist. He was a healer, a priest, mainly a priest. Let's just say priest. And so he was a priest, and he's writing a commentary about the Emerald Tablet, which he's saying in the story, or what he has, he's saying that comes from Apollonius of Tyana. Tyana is in modern-day Turkey. Apollonius is... We think that it is likely Belinus or Belinus in Arabic. So when they talk about the book of Belinus the Wise, they're referring to Apollonius of Tyana, who was a contemporary with Jesus Christ. He walked the planet performing miracles. He was part of the Serapeum, learning from the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, the teachings that come out of that about healing by touch.
In the same time frame as
Jesus? He's a contemporary of Jesus, 1st century AD. First century.
Did they know each other?
I don't know. Okay. Yeah, anybody's guess. Did Jesus really exist? I don't know. Because I'm just saying, I'm going to get a lot of Christians upset, including my parents. Yeah. Jesus could be an archetypal principle. Jesus could be representing astrotheology. There's a lot of narratives that have come out about that.
I've never heard a good argument, though, about him historically not existing because of all the records we have of him.
I think there's
we don't have his bones, allegedly, but, that's it. Everything else points to...
So what you're saying, Julian, is based on a bunch of stories that people say, historical accounts.
Yeah, now you're going my route.
And in a court of law, that's called hearsay, and it's not good evidence. It's he said, she said.
It's not good evidence. It's not good evidence when there's not a large scale of it. When there's a large scale of it, then it becomes good evidence. That's where I would argue. Because in fairness, if you've listened to me on previous podcasts where we discuss anything related to not just Jesus, but anything that's ancient history, I always talk about how there is the human fallacy of, the whisper down the lane, things change, right? So when you write down records, even 20 years later or something, in a time where there's no internet, no sharing, no able to go back and research it, yes, things change. So I certainly think there's all kinds of holes in particularly the Jesus story. But as a historical figure, I've never heard a good argument for him not historically existing.
So personally, I would lean on the idea that someone named Jesus walked the planet, and that a lot of written accounts were written about him, and that perhaps things got conflated, stories got changed. It's that old game. If I whisper a secret to you, and then you whisper to him, and over time,
85% it changes by the 20th.
Now, when you put thousands of years in between that, and you put different agendas, and humans, it all boils down to intentions. What are the intentions of the people writing the stories? All I'm saying is that we cannot, I'm not saying this is what I believe. I'm just saying that, I do believe that it is a fact. We do not have direct conclusive evidence that Jesus actually existed in the context that we read about. What we do have, like you said, is a preponderance of accounts that would suggest he did, which likely did. But hey, when you go to Egypt, there's a whole bunch of stories about the biblical family, Jesus and Mary coming through Tanis, and
I've heard some of these before,
in the caves, and there's stories that the Egyptians tell, for tourism, and it's always been that way. And people tell stories for tourism. You want aliens? I know local Egyptian guides who will tell you aliens. You want a lost civilization? They're not supposed to. They're supposed to stick to the academic paradigm. But for a little baksheesh or a little bit of money, the pyramids, they could be product of Atlantis. That happens. So and then you go back and you're like, well, this Egyptologist tour guide told me, so it must be true. And then he tells somebody, and then you've got 50 YouTube videos. So now there's a preponderance of evidence. So it must be true.
I see what you're saying.
Man, don't believe anything that was written by a man or woman because it was written by a human, and humans have different intentions.
You are right, and you are literally preaching to the choir on this particular type of subject matter, because I bring this up all the time. The place where I struggle with it is, then do you not believe anything, right? Is everything an unintentional lie? Right? Because stories get changed over time, right? It's not like someone's blatantly trying to do it. And then other people are blatantly trying to change history. It's like history is written by the victors for a reason. I get that. But it gets real complicated, because then you get to, well, what can we even believe about anything with all this stuff? And yeah, I mean, I'm going to, when it comes to any major historical figure, like not just Jesus, but, you know, people who are part of massive culture shifts and stuff like that.
Pythagoras?
Sure, but... yeah, maybe bigger than him, but the burden of proof there is going to be on the people trying to say they didn't exist.
Sure.
For sure. Because there's just way more evidence to say they existed. Now, like my friend Tommy G talks about, he's like, I'd love to know what Jesus was doing between 13 and 31, right? The story's not really there. And there are certainly questions.
Well, there's a story there.
You know,
First Imperator Rosicrucian Order, Harvey Spencer Lewis, wrote about the mystical life of Jesus Christ, where, you know, these years in between, how he studied in the ancient Egyptian mystery schools and so forth. The question is, sometimes people can take books like that literally and not understand that things are, it's like the Atlantis problem, right? When it comes to Atlantis, the question is not where is Atlantis, rather what is Atlantis?
right, yeah.
And so if you're not part of the initiated elite, if you didn't go through the degrees of knowledge, you might assume Atlantis is part of a geographical location, because the way Plato describes Atlantis, so specific detail, using historical places in some events and, you know, to craft this story. But what isn't well known is that Plato, well, one, we do know Plato was an initiate. He himself says he was an initiate of the Egyptian mystery schools, right? Yeah, he does. So he was all the classical Greek authors. You know, we credit the Greeks with architecture and art, but almost all the classics say they got it from the Egyptians.
Right, right.
And in the case of the Atlantis story, the oldest written account about Atlantis goes all the way back to Plato. He's the first person to write about Atlantis, and he's saying that his elder statesman Solon, a few hundred years before him, hundreds of years have passed already. There's a story that trickles down for hundreds of years. He's saying Solon went to Egypt. There's absolutely no evidence that can substantiate the fact Solon had been to Egypt. We don't know that with certainty. Plato says Solon went to Egypt and went to the temple of Sais, the temple of Aneth, I believe, in Sais, and spoke to the Egyptian priest Saunchus, which is an odd name for an Egyptian. And when you put this into context, people think about Atlantis and Egypt. This is very late in Egyptian history. This is like 25th, 26th dynasty, somewhere around there, where the Nubian pharaohs were ruling, and then Babylonian Syrians come in, and then some local Egyptians in the north and chase them out. And they're the last indigenous Egyptians until the Persians come in, take them over, and then eventually the Greeks come, and you have Alexander the Great in Ptolemaic Egypt. But you know, there was a lot that shifted around. There was a lot of knowledge that came in, and it's quite possible the Atlantis story and the principles contained in the Atlantis story came from out of Egypt. It could be Babylonian. It could be, you know, the ideas have been merged over time, I'm saying. And then the thing is, we don't even know that this event happened. We don't know for certain. We have no proof that Solon went to Egypt other than Plato said so. And Plato said, Solon said. That's double hearsay. He said, she said. Plato said, Solon said, he went to the temple, and this is what it was. What people don't realize about initiates, they may write, it's like a symbol. I could put this, we talked about this, I think, in the other episode, where I could put the symbol of, a bear, the Russian bear, and Uncle Sam, and it's going to mean one thing to a guy flipping burgers at McDonald's and another to a PhD in political sciences. Same thing with writing and concepts. With Atlantis in the esoteric traditions, people have different concepts of Atlantis depending on your degree of understanding. So it's understood in academia that Atlantis is an allegory by Plato. And I do believe that's the case. And in fact, my mentor, the late, great John Anthony West, a lot of people think he believed in Atlantis. He really, not in the way that people assume he did. He would refer to it as the A word, him in shock, because it was like a polite way of not saying Atlantis to piss off the academics who wouldn't take them serious, because the academics won't take Atlantis serious because the academics believe it's an allegory, not a historical event. And so John Anthony West was also of the same opinion I am, and that is that one, and he's mentioned this, how a lot of these Atlantis hunters are drowning in their own diluted waters trying to chase and look for Atlantis. You would say, Atlantis here, Atlantis there, Atlantis damn near everywhere, because there's a theory for it in Crete. There's a theory for it beyond the Straits of Gibraltar. There's the Richat structure theory. There's Atlantis in the Azores. There's Atlantis. America was Atlantis. You got a theory for every continent when it comes to Atlantis, okay? But when you're looking for a place, you're not going to be looking in the right thing. You're not looking in the right direction. You're chasing a ghost, because Plato was an initiate, and there's good evidence to substantiate the fact that it was very likely around the time that he may have written the Critias and the Timaeus, the dialogues of Plato, that he was actually Sicily or part of Italy, Sicily. Anyway, he was around the Pythagorean mystery schools. And Plato pays homage to Pythagoras before him. And Pythagoras had the Pythagorean mystery schools. And then out of Plato come the Neoplatonic and Platonism, which are also mystery schools. And so when you're writing what I refer, Atlantis is an initiatic narrative. Atlantis is a cosmological metaphor. And it has to do with the music of the spheres and the way that harmonic ratios interact with number.
Music of the spheres.
Music of the spheres was a concept from the Pythagoreans studied the music of the spheres. They believed that there was this sound that the planets made that we can't detect with our ears, and those harmonic ratios correspond to to number. Remember I said number is form, function, and process?
Yes.
Number all music is number. If you learn how to count your bars, if I want to be an MC or a rapper, I need to know how my syllables are going to fall within the bar, the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yep.
1.
1, 2, 3. Yep.
Music is based on, and what is music? Music is vibration. So everything, the metaphysical makeup of man is based on number, which
Absolutely.
cosmologically comes in a sequence. So this was a way for... and so they kind of talk in codes. Initiatic societies will use words and phrases and say things that only the initiated elite, someone who has gone through the degrees, the candidate who's become an initiate and has developed a wider comprehension, would fully understand. In the same way that a PhD degree doctor, isn't just a nurse assistant. He's going to understand surgery in a way that, a nurse wouldn't, because you're studying and you're learning how to take on multiple perspectives and look at things in different ways, and you're enhancing your understanding of a concept. So when you just throw it out to the general public, the uninitiated, and you talk about Atlantis being a place, you're going to assume Atlantis was a place. Right. But for the initiated elite who knows by the signature symbols that are embedded in the actual narrative, oh, I see that he's using Pythagorean devices. He's using concepts that come out of the Pythagorean mystery schools. If anyone's going to find Atlantis, it's going to be someone who is well acquainted with the mystery schools. That is somebody who studies classical Greek. And moreover, and that's what a lot of it is. A lot of people who study this is like, this was just an allegory. It's going to take also a musicologist.
A musicologist.
And there was one that few people talk about. His name was Ernest McLean. And he was, I think he was a professor actually at a university in New York.
What made him a musicologist?
He went through the degrees of studying music. He was a professor of music he studied music. He might have been a musician himself.
So he's a musicologist.
What is a musicologist? Somebody who studies music.
That's a new term to me.
Oh yeah, well, somebody who studies music theory effectively, right?
All right, so it's not deeper than what I was thinking. There was like a deeper meaning to that than you were leading on.
Well, like an Egyptologist studies Egypt. A musicologist studies music.
Okay.
So for me, it's like, how do you explain this? Well, look, he studies music, right? I have a background in music, so this is why this appeals to me, right? Because I'm not only looking through an esoteric lens, I'm also looking at vibration, music. I'm trying to look at different things, but it's hard sometimes when we look into ancient world to determine music. But when we know that certain harmonic ratios correspond to certain numbers, and numbers correspond to cosmological sequences, and when this is understood after initiation, you know that it's an initiatic narrative. I would say that the dream stele of Tutmosis in front of the Sphinx is an initiatic narrative. I would say that the Emerald Tablet is the original Emerald Tablet is an initiatic narrative. Sergius of Nablus was writing for the initiated priesthood, and trying to do it in a way where he could incorporate also concepts of Christianity so that we can make sense of the ancient world. Atlantis is an initiatic narrative written by an initiate, Plato, who was influenced by Pythagorean mystery schools. Ernest McLean, in the back of a book, it's called Atlantis, Egyptian Genesis. At the back of the book, Ernest McLean this isn't his book. They featured him at the very end, and he breaks this all out. In fact, I'm going to make a YouTube video on this and my concept of what I think Atlantis likely is, and I'm going to break it all down because it's very complex. It would take like a 30 to 50, probably a 50-minute dissertation in order to really explain it. In short, it's going to happen. It's going to happen soon. In short, it's a metaphor for a cosmology, and it has to do with balance and order, and really it was a lesson for humanity and humility, learning about, reconciliation of opposites, bringing everything back into balance. It was about universal harmony. And if you don't have a balanced society, it's going to fall apart. And he uses the Atlantis narrative to tell this story. And I'm going to show, like when they talk about the years, Plato says it goes back to this year. All those numbers, whenever you see number in ancient narratives, there's usually deeper meaning. Because if you understand number, you understand what we believe are the genders, what are the qualities of each number. When you get into the qualities, the deeper esoteric aspects. So a lot of the old writings, even in the Bible, a lot of Bible is allegories. And when they're talking about certain numbers, and we're like, how could somebody live 600 years?
It's symbolism.
It's symbolic.
Yeah.
And these were all initiates of the mystery schools. And all this stuff comes out of Egypt and elsewhere, ancient civilizations. So this tablet, the Emerald Tablet, the oldest written account that we have, that we know of, is Sergius of Nablus' commentaries, 5th century AD. However, Sergius is referencing Apollonius of Tyana, and he's writing a commentaries on Apollonius where he's saying that Apollonius talks about the discovery of the Emerald Tablet. Okay, he was a young man. As a young man, he was a prodigy. Everybody was amazed at how much knowledge this guy had. His parents even sent him away. He came back one day, which would now be in modern-day Cappadocia. Sometimes I mispronounce it. Some people say Cappadocia. Some people say Cappadocia. It's in Turkey. We go there during our tours. And so in Cappadocia, where he lived in Tyana at the time, there was a statue of Hermes. Hermes was a Greek god. He was the messenger. He's later syncretized with the Egyptian Thoth, Jehuti, rather, which becomes Thoth, and Hermes Trismegistus. There was a statue of Hermes, and Apollonius was curious by the statue. He connected with the statue. He'd look up at the statue. There's something special about Hermes for him. And one day he comes back and he's admiring the statue. He falls asleep. Keyword, sleep, at the statue. Remember, I think it was in the other podcast I referenced how Tutmosis falls asleep at the Sphinx. Meditation, gnosis, channeling. Apollonius goes into an altered state of, instead of sleep, I think it's best viewed as an altered state of consciousness. And he receives a message, which he says is from the statue, which tells him, dig beneath my feet. Where have I heard this story before? The Sphinx, Hormaket, tells Tutmosis to clear the sand away from its paws. There's common themes that you find in initiatic narratives, which have deeper meaning usually. So then Apollonius, he wakes up and he starts basically shoveling his way down there under the, Hermes is like, if you want the truth, look beneath my feet. And he's like, what do you mean beneath my feet? So he starts burrowing his way in. What he finds is a passage into a sepulchre. I might be mispronouncing that word. He goes into a corridor and opens up into a chamber, and before him is the remains of a man seated on a throne holding an emerald-colored tablet with some text in front of him. Apollonius gets this stuff, and basically after this, Apollonius starts, there's documents and writing, like he was in a meditation at very specific times of the day, like when the sun rises and the sun sets, because the effect that is happening on Earth, it all corresponded. He would be into specific stones, just like we find in the ancient East, Hindu traditions, like they use stones in their astrology and their meditations to have certain effects. Healing properties. He was known for his talismans. He traveled the world and he healed people by touch. He performed what people would say are miracles. He has a lot of parallels to the biblical Jesus Christ. He walked around the earth, performing miracles and all of this. So Apollonius knew something, and what he knew, he learned from the Emerald Tablet in the books before him, which is about the cause of creation. So why the Emerald Tablet is important is because, one, it's at the foundation of the Hermetic tradition, which becomes alchemy, which blossoms into the esoteric traditions we have today. But moreover, because of what's on the Emerald Tablet. The actual text, which we had a translation of on the screen, contains a formula. And the formula is thought to help excel the consciousness of humanity, right? Because the formula is the basis for alchemical experiments. Like when they were doing physical alchemy, they would use this formula. One of the things to point out about alchemy real quick, though, is it wasn't all physical. It wasn't about transmuting lead into gold. That was symbolism. They're real alchemists. They're operative alchemists that did experiments and did that. And they'd call them puffers because they'd spend all day puffing the flames, not realizing the deeper esoteric meaning. The gold is a symbol for illumination, higher consciousness. It's the same concept in Freemasonry. You're polishing your rough ashlar. A master mason isn't the one who extracts the stone out of the bedrock. A master mason is one who knows how to polish his fine stone, his philosopher's stone, right? And so I'm not a mason, but I would say I'm a traveling man who knows his way around the block.
I got you.
And that has to do with you take a rough ashlar and you're perfecting it. That's you. You are a living, walking, breathing temple. You're a mystery school. You have to keep a clean, healthy body to inhabit the gods. You have to perfect yourself to become the best version of yourself. That's what Masonry is all about. It's about making men better men, right? And companionship and so forth. Anyway, so...
A few other things, too.
And a few other things. Yeah. Like what? Well, we don't have to...
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So, you a Mason?
No.
I didn't think so. Anyway...
No secret societies for me.
Yeah. They're interesting because it's
They're
like...
interesting to talk about.
Why are
from
they
the outside.
secret? Honestly, there's on the outside, when I was a teenager, I thought they were all ruling the world and the Illuminati is going to be a one world order and they're all going to take over. And as I got older, I realized, one world order isn't actually a bad idea. If we were all speaking the same language...
God, you were doing so well for like 6 hours.
New World Order.
You're going off the rails now.
New World Order. I'm just saying, hypothetically.
Hypothetically.
Imagine a situation. What do you think that, like,
You will have nothing and you'll be happy.
Well, no, it's not nothing. No, that's not the intent of a New World Order.
We're going to go way too down a rabbit hole.
Well, the whole idea of if we all shared one language, one universal understanding,
I understand,
break down barriers, it's
a utopian.
I'm going to get crushed in the comments section. They're all going to say I'm the Illuminati now.
They're going to say that, yes.
Okay,
He's not, but...
Just know that it boils down to one's intentions. And if the intentions of forming an order is for the good of humanity, that would be good.
Yes.
If it's to control humanity, that's bad.
And humans are very imperfect when it comes to groups and the groupthink that emanates from it, which is why things like that don't work. It's why we still, I'd love a world without war, without any war. We have way too much war. We do need to tamp down on that, fully support that. But, that's not really how the world works.
No, we're not, as humans, we haven't evolved to that or back to that higher level of consciousness, this utopian society. That was the dream.
But Anyextee,
yeah.
I actually got to go. We've been talking for 6 hours. There's way more on the bone. We didn't get to the Luxor Temple, so I'm going to direct people to your videos on that so they can get that in the meantime. We're going to have to do this again at some point because, if I have to do some stuff and it's already almost
They can also
7 o'clock.
get the book. It's number 1, 3 categories on Amazon.
That's right. We're going to have that link in the description. We're going to have the link to your YouTube channel in the description for people to subscribe. We're going to have to do this again, but, dude...
Thank you, Julian. One thing to leave people with on the Emerald Tablet, just know that it could have been the work of Sergius of Nablus just creating this whole story. We don't know with certainty. There's never been an actual tablet to the best of our existence. So don't believe the hype. Use discernment. Be a gangster and go to the source.
Love it. This thing does look cool, though.
Oh, it does. And we offer these for sale on my Adept Initiates website.
All right, on that note, everybody else, give it a thought. Get back to me. Make sure you subscribe. Peace.
Thank you guys for watching the episode. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. They're both a huge, huge help. And if you would like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below.